Hello, 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 everybody. Can you hear me? How's it going today? Thanks for coming by and hanging around. We had a bit of a mismatch with our time zones and whatnot, and Mr. Dutton is very busy, so I think we are going to reschedule that stream for a time when we can really dive in and do what we want to do with it. But I thought since I'm here anyway, that I would just come on and say hello. So how y'all doing? I see like a lot of new people have come in from the Pearly Things show that we had drop a couple days ago. We got a really great reaction to that. I was super pleased to see that it was like overwhelmingly positive that how people reacted to that interview and thought it was interesting. Wasn't sure if everybody was going to want my like overly informative style on her channel because she tends to do like more pop culture stuff and interviews with, like regular people. But yeah, everybody seemed to enjoy it, so that's awesome. Thank you so much for everybody who came over to see me on my channel from her channel. Well, it's been a fun couple of days on Twitter, I'll say that. It's like I'm perpetually embroiled in Twitter wars with feminists, but Pearl said something that this happens all the time. She said something I thought was perfectly reasonable that I didn't see a problem with, and everybody lost their mind. All she said was, men will tend to pick a 25-year-old over a 35-year-old woman. It's just how it goes. When you say things like that, everyone is like conditioned to freak out and come up with all the but this and but that and but what about this situation, but what about that situation, what about hot 35-year-olds, what about women who can still have it, like all these kinds of things, right? So that's been wild. It's amazing the amount of cope that you get when you just say something simple like that. Whereas if Pearl had tweeted, women prefer to date tall men on average, nobody would have had anything to say about it at all. But if you say men prefer to date women who are younger on average, everybody loses their mind. So it kind of shows you how people are conditioned to protect women at all costs, never can offend the woman. You can't speak about women unless you're lifting them up and fluffing up their self-esteem and making them feel good. And just to be clear for like people who are confused about this, what I do on my channel is like I'm looking at history, I'm looking at like philosophy and thinking about things from a quasi-academic position. This is not a self-help channel. If you're a lady with low self-esteem and you want me to tell you you're perfect the way you are, and it doesn't matter that you're 45, men should want to marry you anyway, and that you're wonderful, and you want me to like pump up your self-esteem, this is probably not the channel for that. There's a million channels that do that. There's a million things you can go find that if you want someone to affirm you and validate you and tell you that you are beyond criticism, there's lots of that out there. This just isn't that place. I'm not trying to like purposely shit on women, although I will say we do create women who are insane with the culture, and that's a little bit of what Professor Dutton and I were going to talk about today, was like what makes women this way. When in history have they been like this? When have they not, and why, and all that sort of thing. But the culture we live in right now is completely gynocentric. It's steeped in feminism. Feminism is the default mode. And, criticism of women is forbidden. Most modern women completely lack the ability to self-analyze, to like objectively look at themselves and see where their behavior might be wrong, or see what they could be doing better in life, and it blocks them from improving. It like prevents them from ever growing, maturing, improving. It makes them into crazy narcissists who freak out when you just say like a normal truth on the internet. So that's kind of what that's about. Somebody in the chat had a question if I have read Per Faxneld's Satanic Feminism. Yes, I cite his book in my own book. That's that was his doctoral thesis, I believe, which is now published as a book. So yeah, if people think that I'm making it up, that feminism, that feminists even in the 19th century chose Lucifer as their like mascot, their symbol of liberation, I did not make that up. I am not just a crazy Christian lady making up mean things about nice ladies on the internet. There's a whole doctoral thesis written about this, and it's in the historical record. So yeah, if you want to know more about that, go get his book. It's a great book. But yeah, it's really bizarre where women, like, to criticize them is like almost considered a hate crime. Do you know what I mean? Like, we all know there's other groups you can't say anything about, but certainly when it comes to women, unless you are saying slay queen, you're perfect the way you are, all that kind of stuff, people's knee-jerk reaction is to freak out. And I think we can expect that from the women. We can expect it from the 304s and from the really modern, like, leftist women. Yeah, obviously they're going to do that. But what never ceases to blow my mind is when men jump in. The men who jump in to defend. We call them simps. That's the scientific term. If I say something as blatantly obvious as men are going to prefer, all else equal, men prefer, say, a 22-year-old to a 42-year-old. And men jump in to go, well, actually, there's a lot of reasons why dating older women is really great and wonderful. And we should be looking at women on the inside and like how mature they are. And they come up with all the cope, right? All the reasons. Let me list off for you reasons why a young man might actually want a woman in her mid 40s who's likely not going to be able to have kids. Or my other favorite one is like, well, she's only 40. She could still technically have a child. Yeah, but let's say you're a man who's 30, or even you're a man who's 40. What if you want more than one? What if you want 3 or 4 or 5 or 6? You're not going to get that from a 40-year-old woman. Like, that's not happening. That ship has sailed. So it's just mind-boggling the cope from men on this who want to simp about this sort of thing. And almost every time I will ask them, like, I'll kind of get into conversation with them and I'll say, did you have a single mom by chance? Almost every time they say yes. And this is one of the most horrible things that a lot of these women will do. They divorce the dad, or they never even marry their child's dad. They have a son. They raise the son to be the man of the house because they don't have one. And they treat him like, have you ever seen these posts from women where they're like, my son is my king. He's the man of the house. I don't even need a man because my son is my king. Like this creepy, inappropriate kind of mother-son relationship where she makes him into the man of the house. And usually that son will grow up with her dumping a lot of emotional stuff on him, like inappropriate emotional vomit about like her problems with boyfriends, her problems with men. And I've seen this in like a lot of the leftists that my husband debates too, some of these men who are this way. Every time you ask, yeah, they had a single mom. And the single mom almost like trains young men to be the shield, right? Like when I'm hoeing, when I'm doing inappropriate things, when I'm acting badly, when my bipolar comes out or my, borderline personality behavior comes out, like your job is to protect mommy and shield me from criticism and tell everybody I'm a great mom, all these sort of things. So these men are like truly programmed to jump in and defend mommy. And I believe that 99% of the time, that's why they do that. That's why you'll see men jump in and like defend the craziest stuff, the craziest behavior by women. So like I've been saying a lot lately because people are like, why do you hate women? Why do you hate women? Well, first of all, I don't hate women, but they're pushing me. They're getting me to the point that it's like, I'm finding less and less to love about modern women these days. I'm getting more and more disenfranchised with dealing with them at all because I can't say anything without them acting like, well, but what about this? It's like they're just programmed to not accept anything that's in reality if it doesn't fit their like fantasy world that they live in. And then they, of course, start with ruthless personal attacks against me. They'll call me, they'll say, why do you hate women? And then they'll say, you're fat, you're old, you're going through a midlife crisis, you're in an abusive marriage, your husband probably beats you. Like they'll say the worst things. They'll say things like, I hope your children ghost you the minute they turn 18 and never speak to you again. they'll be like viciously nasty and personal just because I said like a broad generalization of here's how like male female dynamics work, or here's a psychological pattern I see in modern women that wasn't there before. If I just am like citing research, they'll come at me with like vicious, nasty personal attacks. And then everyone's like, why does she hate women? It's like, what? Well, I mean, they're constantly trying to destroy me at every turn now that I have a book out and these sort of things. So it's like, you're kind of making a good case for like the MGTOW guys and the red pill guys. I'm not going full MGTOW. I'm not going there, but I'm just saying, like, we've created a culture full of women who are complete narcissists and cannot, they're incapable. It's like they're physically incapable of admitting when they're wrong, looking at their own behavior and seeing any problems with anything they ever do. That's why it can never be anyone's fault except the man. It's always the man's fault. You know, there will be women that like leave their husband and kids high and dry because they miss being, like, there was one on Twitter today that said his neighbor's wife left him because she missed being kissed passionately. And people were like, that's valid. They were like, of course, girl, leave him. Like, what? We're dismantling families and we're destroying children's lives because mommy needs to be kissed passionately. Like, y'all are lucky that I'm not like dictator of the world, because you wouldn't like what happened to women who think that they can do that. It's insane that anybody would validate that. That's like pathological behavior, that somebody would tear apart their own family because they're like bored, or they need to find themselves, or they want to feel sexy again. Like, I cite this all the time and people think I'm nuts. But if you ask people, most people know of someone where something like this has happened, right? Where mom leaves the marriage after 15 years because, you know, she wants to feel sexy. She needs the passion again or whatever. And it's like, I don't think that should be allowed. I don't think we should socially or perhaps even legally allow people to just do that. Now, it's the same thing for men, but here's the difference. If a man leaves his wife and children because he's dating a 20-year-old, right? And he wants to feel sexy again or whatever. She makes me feel young again. Society will just absolutely destroy the man. Like, he'll be shunned from everything. Everyone thinks it's terrible. His own family will be, everyone's upset. Like, if a man does this behavior, everyone's like, oh, what a jerk, what a pig, he's scum. If he's like super top tier, like maybe top 1% of men, people will grumble about it and kind of let him get away with it. I'll give you that. But in general, if a man just like abandons his family for a younger woman, everyone's upset. Everyone agrees that's wrong. But when a woman does it, there's a bunch of people that want to jump in and be like, well, but she was unhappy. And what do you want her to do? Just live a life without passionate kissing? Or it's like, first of all, those are things that you should like, there's a weird troll in my chat. There's some, Winston Smith here is actually a man who is literally like schizophrenic and follows me around the internet, like hollering about something. He made 1,300 videos and I'm slandering him by not promoting him and watching his videos. Very bizarre. There's crazy people all over online. But anyways, yeah, it's like totally acceptable for women to just leave for goofy reasons like that, to just be like, well, I'm not fulfilled, or I feel like I'm held back, like vague emotional reasons of like, I just don't feel it. I'm just not feeling it anymore. The vibe check is just off to me now. Like, I used to love him and everything, but like now I just feel like we're not compatible. There was a lady, I retweeted a video of this, like probably around my age woman. I think she said she was turning 40 and she was like a little chunky lady. And she was talking about how when she said yes to her husband and got married at 29, which by the way, like we could get into why she might have not been married till she was 29. Judging on her video, I think there's reasons. But she was saying, that after she got her degree and started her business and became a boss lady, she just didn't feel compatible with this man anymore. So she had to leave for herself. And it was like maybe a 60-second video at most. And the woman must have said I or me like 100 times. The whole video just sounded to me like me, what I want for myself and what makes me happy, me, I, me. And that's why I, blah, 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 right? The whole video was just that. And I was like, how are we not recognizing that this is like crazy narcissistic behavior? Why do people act like this is totally valid and fine? It seems insane to me. But according to a lot of like younger people and people who are very brainwashed, they think this is normal, acceptable behavior. Like you just commit for life to marry a man, you soak up his resources and everything while you're going to school. And once you get out of school and you have a business and you don't feel like you need him, you just ghost him. It's fine. You got to do you, girl. You got to find yourself. You have to self-actualize, or like all this self-helpy shit, which I'm totally against. I'm very opposed to self-help culture. I'm very in favor of self-improvement. Things like, lose some weight and get fitter, try to be healthier, read more, learn more, try to improve your relationships, stuff like that. That's just very basic and practical self-improvement, growing as a human being, especially like in your spiritual life. I'm all for that. But this modern garbage, life coaching nonsense, especially for women, I feel like maybe there's an argument to be made for it for men, because a lot of men are growing up with no men in their lives. They're raised by single moms. Their teachers are women. They're just like completely soaked in the woman sphere, right? And maybe for a man, having like a male life coach or something might be okay. But for women to do this, like, tell me I'm a queen, tell me I'm perfect the way I am, I'm beautiful no matter what, I'm beautiful at any size, this like pure delusion that we're just like shotgunning into young women's mouths is clearly destroying them. It's clearly making them insane. All you have to do is scroll through TikTok and watch them act like absolute lunatics. And it's just like permitted. It's just fine. Everyone's just like, oh, that's just how the girls be. They just be having so much fun. And I sometimes I do feel like I'm one of the only people in the world. I think that's why like people like Pearl and I get along, but I've got a lot of cool lady friends who aren't this way. Like Slow Boy Whiteboard in my chat there, she's awesome. She's based. She's not like this. There's plenty of women who are not these insane weirdos. But the insane weirdos are the ones dominating the culture, and they're the ones that are like kind of ruining it for everyone else. I guess that's my beef, like ultimately, is that by letting the 304s run wild and kind of steer society and engineer things, it really does ruin it for the few good women who are out there. Like some of us really do want families. We want to be married. We want to live a life of meaning and purpose. And it makes it very hard because all these crazy, insane, borderline personality girls running around with all their body parts hanging out, doing OnlyFans, and then, calling themselves 10s when they're lucky to be a 4. Men get really black-pilled. They don't trust women anymore. Like it took me like 5 years of building trust with my husband for him to kind of let down his guard. And it wasn't really his own fault. He'd just been exposed to so many awful, really bad women who would, cheat on him and do all this kind of stuff. And he just kind of thought, well, this is how women are. Same thing had happened to his dad before his mom. Like his dad had been previously married before his mom, just had his life absolutely demolished by a woman. Really sad stuff. You know what I mean? Men out there are really getting shellacked by these broads, and it's allowed. It's encouraged by the family courts. It's socially accepted. And even when the woman is clearly in the wrong, most people's knee-jerk reaction is to jump in and defend her. Totally insane to me. It makes no sense. But that's like the culture that we've built now. This is what we've saturated everything in. And it's like, it's reinforced by everything, by like all the music. Name a pop star right now in the music industry who is not basically a witch. They're all like, all their imagery is witchcrafty. All of their themes in their music are of like sexually dominating men, being a boss bitch, controlling the money, having the power. It's like all of them. Think of any popular female pop star right now. It's all of them. Same with the female rappers, same with the actresses, most movie themes. I mean, how many Marvel movies am I going to have to stomach full of ass-kicking chicks? How many times do I have to watch some 90-pound girl who's like a vegan actress kick the shit out of 50 Green Berets while she's enjoying a hot bowl of soup? It's absurd. It's ridiculous. And I'm just so tired of going along with it and pretending that this is how things actually are. And I don't know what you guys think about it, but do you guys have, since I'm here and just chilling and we're having a chill stream, do you guys have questions? There's a dono chat link pinned at the top. If you do want to send me grift bucks, if you want to support my grift of being a pick-me girl, a ruthless pick-me girl who just wants male approval, and so I write entire books, and do huge research projects and act like a total dweeby nerd and bring you all the facts and the history just so that I can I don't know, at 42 years old, be a pick-me girl, even though I've been married to a wonderful man for 16 years. If you want to support my grift, you can send me a dono chat or a super chat. Mud just became a member, a channel member. Thank you so much, Mud. That's so awesome. I have a couple of channel members now. I'm like a real YouTuber, you guys. And he sent a $2 super chat. Thank you so much. And he said, I heard married women are just their husbands' horses. Is that a horse emoji? Well, I've been called a breeding mare, so maybe that could be. I'm often it's so ridiculous, right? It's like people will go to my bio or they'll see a debate I do with my husband and they'll accuse me of being abused. I'm in an abusive marriage. They'll say things like, well, if you want to give up all your power and control, I guess that's fine, but I'm not going to. They'll insinuate that I'm weak. And it's like, debate me then, because I'm going to kick your ass. Not to try to act like I'm the coolest. I'm not. It's just that I'm smart and I know things, and you are usually dumb as a box of rocks. The women that try to come for me, in other words, are usually 80 IQ, probably have neck tattoos, and they're trying to insult me, and it's whatever. Also, I'm super happy. My life is great. I wouldn't advocate for my lifestyle if it wasn't great. It's great. Don't be a hoe, be a housewife. It's better. I guess I'm just in a mood today where I'm just going to say what I think and everyone's going to be mad, but they can stay mad. Nominal user just became a new member. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. All the cool kids are members on my channel. Pearl said that the internet said I'm goated. I had to text my Gen Z kids and ask them if that was a good thing or a bad thing. And they laughed at me and said it was a good thing. So I'm a cool kid now. So you should become a channel member. Slow Boy Whiteboard's a member. I told you, she's awesome. She's very cool. She does not have this mentality at all. I should ask her. She doesn't want to come on camera or anything. She's a normal woman who is private and just busy doing what she's supposed to be doing, which I love about her. But I want to ask her how this feminist mind virus just skipped right over her, because she's just so incredibly based. But I have a lot of based friends, like Moon, who's a mod in my chat, super based. Jamie Hanshaw, very cool, wonderful lady. Courtney Turner, who's all over my channel, very based, cool woman, super smart. There's great women out there, and they're all my friends, and they're all channel members or mods in my chat. I'm just saying. Any chance you can get on Tim Pool's show? Perhaps, maybe. I know Pearl was stumping very hard to get me on there. She's been so gracious, by the way. I have to say, she has a humongous channel. She's everywhere right now. There's no reason for her to just be promoting my stuff all over the place. She doesn't have to do that. She had me on her show, but she doesn't need me on her show by any means. And she's I just think you're really smart and people should listen to the stuff you say. So she has been pushing to get me on these things. So maybe since she's out there stumping for me, you never know. But yeah, big shouts to Pearl, because that's very cool for her to go out of her way to promote me when she totally doesn't have to. Do I have plans for a new book? Yes, it is being written as we speak. I'm probably about halfway through, but this one's going to be quicker because it's going to be my top 15 arguments against feminism. My first book, this one, Occult Feminism, this one is like a historical, philosophical, theological kind of based book. It does have a lot of stats and some arguments woven through it and all that good stuff. But some people just wanted, like, what are the arguments? What are the facts? Like, without any of the, not everybody has a brain that wants to dig into like all the deep philosophical and theological underpinnings of political ideas. So the next book's going to be my top 15 arguments against feminism, with all of the like data and facts to support it, all the citations. And I'm kind of writing it as a guide on how to debate this stuff, because a lot of people will message me and be like, I watched you debate, Mina or somebody, and you absolutely crushed her. And I want to, I want to defend these ideas to somebody in my life or one of my friends, but I don't know how to go about it, or I can't just store all those facts in my brain or whatever. So it's going to be more of a legalistic, if I was debating the subject, here's all my best arguments and here's all the documenting, supporting evidence and stuff like that. So hope to have that done in just a month or two. It's going quick because I'm basically just articulating and writing down things I've already argued a whole bunch over the years. So that will be cool. And then I've been working on a huge project for a year and a half now, on Eastern feminism and like the Bolshevik feminists and how it was different than Western feminism, but kind of run and promoted by the same internationalist banking people and whatnot. And that one, that's kind of my passion project, but that one's taking longer because it's going to be big. It's going to be a big, heavy, deep, nerdy philosophical history book is what it's going to be. So that one, don't know exactly when I'll be able to get it out. It just depends. I still, in case you guys didn't know, I still have 2 kids at home. I still run the household. Andrew works a lot. He has 2 channels. He's very busy. So I still have to do all my wifely duties, all my mothering and all that stuff. And I'm, doing some church things now with helping my church. So those things always come first. And then this stuff is like my other thing I like to do on the side when I have other time. So rather than just like watching TV or like scrolling TikTok or something, I'm usually studying and researching and writing and doing projects. So that's what I do. That's why it's like I might not be able to pump out the content like some people can, because this is not my full-time job. Because I'm having some success, everybody wants to accuse me of being a career woman now, but I'm really not. This is what I do when I find time, and I love doing it. So I try to find time, but yeah, it's usually just like me staying up late after everyone else is already in bed. And that's when I find the time to do these things. And then I squeeze in some streams and interviews in between things. So hopefully I can get one book out by the end of the summer, and I would love to have the next one out before the end of the year if I can pull it off. So we'll see. Let's see what else you guys got. What books did you start learning epistemology and philosophy? I don't have them here. I have Jay's books. Jay Dyer's books are great. I'm a very I love listening to lectures. I know, super weird. I think it's like less than 10% of people prefer that method of learning, but I've always, since I was little, loved to just listen to people talk, and I can absorb information really well that way. So I do have books. I do read books. I love books. I write books. But a lot of times I'm listening to like philosophy lectures or debates, or listening to audiobooks. In fact, I'd say like that's where a lot of my knowledge base came from. Just as the kids were little and audio books and stuff first came out, I immediately loved them, because if you have to do like bathroom cleaning day, or you gotta, mop the floors, you got like a bunch of choring ahead of you, you've got to like do a bunch of weeding in your garden or something that you're like, it's going to be a long, boring 2-hour chore I've got to do. I would just pop in my headphones and listen to an audiobook or a lecture or a debate or something like that. And it just makes the time fly. It makes the chore you're doing really enjoyable. And like, that's 99% how I learn stuff. And then if I want to go more in depth, then I go later and like actually do research and take notes. And I have file folders and stuff in my computer for things. So yeah. Yes, the Edward Dutton interview is going to be rescheduled. We haven't done it yet. We kind of goofed up the time zones between where he is and where I am. So it was going to like make today like really short and pressed. So we're going to reschedule that, and I'll let you guys know as soon as we do. But I do have some other really fun guests coming on. Tim Gordon and his wife Stephanie are going to be on July 11th, I think. That's going to be super exciting. If you guys like my stuff, you'll love their stuff. They are Roman Catholics, but very based patriarchist, homeschooling, big family having Catholics, and we have a lot in common. So that'll be a great thing to watch and listen to. And Christopher is a new channel member. Thank you so much, Christopher. You are awesome. You have joined the Based Moms channel. So that means you're cool now. You're in with the cool. I'm so not cool. I'm just totally joking. I'm obviously a huge nerd. But yeah, so he's coming on. I've got a few more guests lined up that I can't announce quite yet, but you'll see. There's some cool stuff coming up. I am not Roman Catholic. I am Orthodox. If you guys don't know what Orthodox Christianity is, it's probably more similar to Roman Catholicism than it is Protestantism. And I'm going to do a stream about that too, because so many people ask like about why I converted from Protestantism to Orthodoxy and how that happened. And I get a shocking number of messages from men who have converted and are having a really hard time with their wife wanting to convert with them, which that's always so sad to me. I always feel like it would be such a struggle and such a hard thing. And I know a lot of families struggle with that, where like one of my best friends, she's like a really committed Protestant Christian, and her husband is kind of agnostic, and she's just never been able to really get him on board. He's more supportive than he used to be, but that's tough. It's tough when you have a family and it's like, one of the spouses finds God or finds Orthodoxy, and then the other spouse wants to stay where they are. It's just tough. So I wanted to do a stream about that at some point. I want to go to the Tim versus Jay IRL debate in October, if it's like in Nashville, probably, because that's an easy drive for me. It's not like, it's like a 1-day straight shot south of where I am, so it's not hard to get there. So yeah, if they do it there, which it looks like that's where it's going to be, then I would love to go to that. That would be fantastic. Let's see. Here's a comment. Some women want to get a degree and a few years work experience before becoming a housewife to have a fallback or backup in case their husband dies or becomes disabled. What's your view? Okay. I understand people wanting to have security. Women are hardwired to want security. The last thing you want is a bunch of kids and then you've been dependent on your husband's income and something happens to him. That's it's a valid fear to have. But I would say the better way to go about that, because what happens to girls when we encourage this route, when we say go to college and have a backup plan first, number one, you go into the marriage like subconsciously planning for it to end, which I think is a problem. And then you end up usually acquiring some level of college debt. You usually end up delaying having your kids until later. And then if you get into the workforce and you start gaining experience, why would you want to stop, right? So if you just spent 4 years in college, you earned a degree, you got hired at some great place, it's really hard to just all of a sudden arbitrarily, after a couple years of working in this great job and you're doing well, to suddenly pump the brakes on that, go back to having one income and completely switch gears to being a housewife. I've had friends who've tried to do that, and it's been a really tough psychological switch for them. Like, it wasn't even as much like the physical part, and maybe not even as much the money part. It's just very hard to change gears from being really focused on college and career for 5 to 10 years and then just put the brakes on that and all of a sudden become a mom and a wife. Motherhood is quite a transition anyway. It's like having a baby is almost like having a death and a rebirth for yourself as well as a mother. Ask any woman who's had babies and they'll tell you, like, your old you kind of dies away and you kind of transform into a new version of yourself, the mom version of yourself. And so I think to try to also add just putting the brakes on a good career to do that, I think that's what leads to a lot of the postpartum depression and like dysmorphia and like difficult feelings that women struggle with, is transitioning away from this mindset of like careerism and, you know, personal goals. And I'm kind of that kind of a person. I love having like personal goals and measuring progress, all those kind of things. And so it can be really hard if you've had that mindset to just switch to like, because motherhood, especially with an infant, is more of like an hourly basis goals where it's like, okay, let's just try and get this breastfeeding session to work. Let's see if we can get the baby to take a nap so that I can take a nap because I've gotten like 3 hours of sleep in the last 2 nights. You know, it's a difficult transition as it is. It gets harder as you get older. Having babies is a young woman's game. Ain't nobody going to ever tell me different, because I had my first at 20 and I had my last at 32. And it's much harder at 32 to have an infant than it is. The pregnancy is a little bit harder. The birthing, not that I had like a difficult birth. I was blessed with like pretty good births, but it's just, I mean, the lack of sleep and the energy that it takes. And by then I had a bunch of other kids in the home. It just gets tougher when you're older. It just is. Whereas when you're 20, you guys know how it is. When you're 20 years old, remember how you could like stay up all night and hang out with your friends and then like go to work on 2 hours of sleep and rock it all day and you were like pretty okay. You could just get some coffee and you were fine. But that's not the case when you are 32, 35, 38 years old. It's just much harder. It's a harder transition in every way. So I think it's a big mistake to tell women do college and career first, then your family. The way you can plan for this financially is, number one, life insurance. If you're a young couple, say you get married when the woman is 20 or 22 and the man's like maybe a year or two older, your husband can probably get dirt cheap life insurance so that if the worst happens, okay, well, at least, you know, you can probably pay off your house and, you know, do okay until the kids are older. That's what things like that are for. I mean, we have insurance for those things for a reason. That's number one. And number two, what you can do that I think makes more sense, because I'm not completely silly. I'm not trying to take people back to a different place in time, you know, where things were a certain way. The society is structured how it is now. We have created a society that makes it very hard to survive on one income, makes everything in society is antithetical to building a large family. It's antithetical to keeping your marriage together. Like every force in society is trying to tear all that down. I know that, believe me, I've been through it myself. So I'm sympathetic to what people are facing when they're trying to have a more traditional marriage and family these days. So I think to be realistic and say like, okay, if she still wants to have something like that, do something similar to what I'm doing, where maybe that's your side gig. Your family always comes first. Your husband's career is the breadwinning career. You're not career focused. You're home focused. You're family focused. Let him, you know, men are built anyway to be more careerist, and men can do a lot of work on little sleep a lot easier than us women can. It's just biology. There's a ton of data backing that up. Let your husband work. If you want to do part-time college while you're raising your kids, my best friend did that. It took her 10 years to complete her degree, but she got a master's. She waited until all her kids grew up. Her youngest just graduated high school and is going off to college. She is now 42 and has finished raising her family. She had 3 kids. They all turned out great. Took her 10 years, but she's got a master's. Now, if she wants to, she can go get a job in her field that she got her master's in, and she already started working part-time in that field a couple years ago. But she's done so well, and she and her husband have done so well, she's like, I actually don't have to. Like, I could, and I might, but maybe I won't. You know what I mean? So and everybody thought she was doing it wrong. When she had her first baby, she was really young. They got married really young. I think they were like 18 and 19 when they got married, and everybody thought her life was over. And I'll tell you, she's more successful than our other two friends that went off to university. They went off to multiple universities. They did like a 4-year degree at one school and then did another degree at a different school and have tons of debt. Didn't get married till they were later. Didn't have babies until they were older. And she's doing much better. Like, she is flourishing. She's doing great. So I think something like that makes a lot of sense. Like, do your family when you're young, because that's what, nature is telling us to do. That's what works the best if you want to have a large family, especially. And start with a family mindset. And then from there, if you want to do something else as you get older, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's a problem with that. I've never said women can never work. And some women, if you do have to work because just the finances don't allow it, that is a realistic situation for some people. If you do have to work as a mom, see if you can do something where you're working part-time from home. Maybe you're doing remote work. Like, anything you can do to just physically be home with your kids more is great for your kids, in my opinion, rather than just always having to have them in a daycare. So that was kind of a long answer, but that's kind of what I think about it. Let's see if I missed anything here. A lot of people can't afford to have kids now. Yeah, I hear that a lot. I understand what people are saying, but Pearl and I actually did a whole separate episode on just that topic. It's, if you go to her channel and go to her lives and just scroll down a little bit, it's not near as popular as the one that just came out, but we did do a whole live stream about how to budget for a family and how you can be a stay-at-home mom on one income and things like that. So if you guys want to know how you can make it affordable, there's definitely ways to do that. I think a lot of people grow up in very urban areas and they get this idea that life is like super incredibly expensive, and it can be, but you can make things a lot cheaper. And one of the best things to do is just get out of these major urban centers and go somewhere rural, somewhere small town, because homes are cheaper, just everything, cost of living is much less, and so much of what people's jobs are can be done remotely now that it's not like an automatic given that you have to do a commute. So go check that out. It's like Family on a Budget or something on Pearl's channel. There's a little clip from it here on my channel, but the full episode's there. And we break down all the numbers, and we talk about all the different strategies you can do to raise a family on one income if that's what you want to do, because that's what we think is the best. Let's see, what else? A lot of women out-earn the men that would wife them and would never go down in income. Yeah, that's becoming a big problem too. And a lot of that is because, like, do you guys remember that show? It was like Dirty Jobs or something. The guy who got really famous talking about how we've told everyone to go to university and it's a stupid deal for most people, and that we should push especially men like back into the trades, because number one, we have a huge shortage of people who want to work in the trades and we need them. And number two, there's all these people earning useless degrees. So you'll get women who will get degrees in communications or marketing or something, and they'll land some fancy marketing job and make a lot of money. And then they're sad because they're like, well, no, I can't find a man who's like good enough for me and makes enough money. That's another reason why I say, if you know you want a family, don't do that. I know it sounds crazy to people. They think I'm crazy when I say this, but you really can just, Mike Rowe is who it was. You can just not do that. My husband is in the trades. He was a mechanical engineer, and he started not making a ton. I mean, it wasn't easy when we were young. And then as he got older and more experienced and learned more and more, he got better and better jobs, and things got easier and easier. But that's the other thing people don't think about. When you're young and you just have like 2 little babies, that's not as expensive as you think. It's only expensive if you're one of these women who needs a new like Birkin bag every, season, and you want like fancy brand new cars, and you have like this high standard of living based off of Instagram, where you think you need lip fillers and Botox and lash extensions and fake nails and all this stuff. You can live like a simple, affordable life, and when your kids are young, it's not that expensive. And then as you get older, your earning potential increases. Most people's income goes up as they get older, not less. So as your family grows, your husband will probably make more money. And it kind of just works out that way. Works pretty well. Slowboy Whiteboard said, invest in your kids. Yeah, like ultimately, like if we want to cut through everything, that's what it is. That's what it's about. You got to invest in your children. They're the future. They're not only the future of society, they're your future. People seem to think you just raise kids until they're 18 and then you're done. And it doesn't work that way. You're going to have grandkids. Your children are always going to be in your life. They're always, I mean, God willing, we hope that, right? So you want to invest in the right things. And I think this is what we were talking about earlier, these extremely selfish, narcissistic, shallow women that see success as having material stuff. I mean, there's plenty of men who feel this way too. There's a lot of men who think that success equals stuff, the Bugatti or the, you know, tailored suit or, you know, being able to go to like exclusive restaurants. I've just never been that way. I don't really understand that personality. So, I mean, I don't get it. The materialism is over the top these days. And I mean, it's one of the reasons why the birth rate's so low. People don't see any benefit to having kids. Like my husband says, people now just see children as a drain on resources, and people care about building resources, mostly for clout. Most people want to be able to post to the gram, you know, and put their fancy shit on Instagram or whatever, or they measure success by their material comfort. That's just a really shallow way to look at life, in my opinion. And it's why everyone's so unhappy. It's why people, you know, need all these psych drugs and everything else. Women constantly want more things. They seem way more materialistic and superficial than men now, in my opinion. I would say overall that's true. Yeah, I would definitely say overall, like in my experience of people who are my friends, it's usually like the man is usually pretty happy with his paid off car because he's like, it's clean and it still runs. Like, why get a new car? And it's usually the wife who's like, but I want the new car. I want the fancy thing. This one has more features. And you know, she wants to like remodel the kitchen every 5 years because she's tired of the color. She wants a new backsplash. It's like, I don't mean to hate on women. I'm not trying to do that. This is just something I personally don't understand. I'm sure Lauren Southern's new thing is to call everyone autistic if they disagree with her. So I'm sure she would say that I must be on the spectrum because I don't really care about that stuff. I just don't care. Like, I'll drive my old cash car until it falls apart because why would you want a car payment? Why do you want a big, fat, expensive car payment to worry about every month if you have a perfectly good car that gets you everywhere you want to go? That's just how, I mean, I was kind of raised that way. If you guys haven't seen it yet, there's an interview with my grandma on my channel here. She's 97. And we talk a lot about what life was like for her when she was young, what women were like, what dating was like. And when she kind of goes through talking about those things, she says she and her girlfriends never felt oppressed. They never felt like second-class citizens. And she grew up in the 30s. She was born in 1926. Yeah, so 20s and 30s is when my grandma grew up. And I asked her, like, you know, most people think women, you know, when you were a kid were like these oppressed slaves. And she's like, no, we never felt like that. We never did. Nope, never even occurred to us, right? And she talks about, you know, meeting her husband and the things that she was looking for in a man. There was none of this 6 foot tall, 6-pack abs, 6 figures. Like, that was not a thing for her. She was like, well, I wanted a guy who was nice and kind to me. I wanted someone that I liked their mother and their family, because you don't want to marry someone and then like you can't get along with their family. Want someone who goes to the same church as me, or at least has the same like beliefs as me. You know, somebody who is, you know, has a good reputation for being like honest and trustworthy. Totally different ball game, you guys. Like, I don't think people realize that it's not always been like this. It's true. There's always been these kinds of women. There's always been these kinds of women, but they weren't always the dominant ones. Women were overall much more pleasant and much more kind and less materialistic back in the day. It's just true. And that's why Professor Dutton's going to talk to us about that when we reschedule him, about different times in history of why things were that way and why they change, and why right now feminism is the dominant culture. And it's because we're a civilization that's in decline. Anytime you look at an empire that's collapsed or a civilization that has declined and disappeared, feminism comes at the end every time. It, as somebody in the chat said, it was like a luxury, like the feminist mindset is a luxury. It totally is. This is why I always try to hammer women on this idea of like, who builds the roads, who keeps the lights on, who built all this tech that I'm using to talk to you guys right now, who makes all the appliances and modern conveniences that make it possible for you to even be a career woman. There's a reason that didn't happen until after the Industrial Revolution. It's because men built a world that made this possible. And then women just one day decided, oh, well, the men are obsolete now and we don't need them and we can just be boss bitches and have careers. And it's like the minute the power goes out, nobody's a feminist. That does not exist anymore. It goes away. And all these strong, independent women, let me tell you, imagine a situation where they had to go without power for 3 weeks. We'll just do 3 weeks as an arbitrary time frame. An EMP has hit, or there's been a hacking of the electrical grid, right? And it's been catastrophic, and it's going to take them about 3 weeks to get the power back on, to get satellites and cell phones working again, to get the internet back, to get the lights back on, to get heating and air conditioning to work, to get traffic lights to work. Think of all the things you wouldn't have if the grid went down. Now imagine there was going to be 3 weeks of no power, no modern anything, and feminists just had to endure those 3 weeks. The most strongest, most independent women would be looking for the first man to service. we'll put it in nice YouTube terms. They will be servicing the first man who they think can like get their cell phone working again. Do you know what I mean? So a lot of what I do is just trying to like poke through these illusions that people have, this total fantasy that women don't need men anymore, that they're strong and independent. They're not strong and independent. They're not whatsoever. And you see this because these same feminists who are insisting to you that they're strong and independent and they don't need men and they have their own money and they have their own stuff, they will also tell you that they are perpetual victims of the patriarchy, that they're being held down, they're being oppressed. And I'm like, it can't be both. You're either a strong, independent woman that no man can hold you back, or you're an oppressed victim that is being held down by the patriarchy. But they will hold both views at the same time. That's what we call cognitive dissonance. And that's why they're all insane. That's why they're all crazy, because they are trying to live with two opposing worldviews at the same time and trying to reconcile that. And so that's why they're all insane. That's why they're all depressed. That's why they turn into these crazy women that will burn your house down if you slight them or something, you know? So that's what's happening there, in my opinion. That's my fancy analysis. Let's see. What else we got? I got a few more minutes here. Anybody else have questions? Hi, Mela. How are you? Good to see you. Yeah, women need men and men need women, otherwise extinction. Yes, totally. I agree. Yeah, men need women too. It's just they need us in a different way, right? They need us in a different way. And this is where women struggle. It's like they don't ever want to admit to the things that, like, okay, maybe I don't have total power and control in this facet of the dynamic, right? Men have the monopoly on force. Sorry. Men tend to do better in life as they age, and women's like clout and power tends to decline as they age. Sorry. Sorry about reality. Like, this is why I always say I would like to take people when they're young and make them work on a farm for like a whole year. They have to go work on a farm and they have to earn their food, right? If you don't go out and take care of the chickens and collect the eggs, if you don't go out and tend to the garden, if you don't milk the cow, if you don't bale the hay and prepare for winter, like if we had people have to go do farm work for a whole year to live with no power, everything would be different. It would snap them back to reality and make them see like how the natural world actually is. Technology is like a matrix, right? It puts this like false illusionary screen in front of your face that especially this younger generation who has never had a life outside of social media, they've never had a life outside of technology, they honestly don't understand how it works. They don't know, like, this is how they can all be vegans and stuff. They've never seen, like, I grew up on farms. Where, like, a raccoon would massacre a newborn nest of baby bunnies because that's how nature works. Some animals starve or they get disease and they die. Like the realities of life are just much more in your face, and you're forced to confront them from the time you're little. And so you understand how things work. So if you grow up in that environment, you don't have this weird delusion that like women are as strong as men, women can do anything men can do, we don't need them, that technology hasn't completely changed how things work. Or it helps you with time preference too, right? So if you have to work all spring through fall so that you can make it through the winter, you learn to have a long time preference. You learn to plan ahead. You learn to delay gratification. These are super important things for people to experience as they're developing and growing so that they can be resilient and understand how the world works. But most kids nowadays growing up, the younger generation is like in front of their phone 24/7, and they think this is the world. They like wake up in an apartment building and they live in a big city. Everything is technological, everything is electronic, everything is modern. And they like, I'll tell you a story, you guys. When I was 24, I moved to a big city for the first time. And I was talking with some girls that I had just met there, and it was November and it was deer hunting season back where I'm from in the Midwest. And I was like, oh, my friends are all posting pictures of their, their first deer of the year or whatever. And they were like, what? What are you talking about? And I was like, it's deer season. They were like, what's that? And I said, it's deer hunting season. It's like we get 2 or 3 weeks where we can actually go out with firearms and hunt deer rather than just with a bow. And like everybody gets really excited. Now, when I grew up, that's how we ate. Like we'd have a couple deer in the freezer, and that's like how we got through winter because we was poor farm kids. Not that we were like that destitute, but it was like you'd get a deer or two and you'd have meat for the whole winter. It was great. And these girls were horrified. They were like, why would anybody shoot a precious baby deer? Why would you shoot Bambi? That's so mean. How can you be so heartless and cruel and disgusting and awful to shoot a deer? And then this girl said, I'm not kidding. She said, why don't they just go to the store and buy meat like everyone else? Then they don't have to kill animals. Yeah. That's what we're dealing with. So like they don't know where their food even comes from. They don't understand that somebody had to raise that cow and slaughter it and package it and truck it over to your grocery store to get it there, or truck it over to your Taco Bell so that you can get your chalupa or whatever. They don't even know that. It's like they think that the modern world just somebody waved a magic wand and created Taco Bell, and they're completely independent from this, and they don't need. It's mind-boggling. So like 99% of what I'm trying to do is like take these precious slow people and help them understand reality and like history and how we got here and how things actually work and why they're wrong. And so they get very mad. But yeah, this is the kind of, these people vote. These girls that do this. Another story from this same time period. So I was young and I was working in a mall at like a cosmetics counter. I know, not like the best sampling of girls that are working at cosmetics counters in the early 2000s. But we went to like a Starbucks in the middle of the mall to get coffee, and we're standing in line waiting, and it was an election day. It was like a midterm election day. And somebody in the line was like, oh yeah, I forgot it's like an election or whatever. Like, are you guys gonna like go vote? Like, are you gonna vote? And this other girl goes, yeah, like I want to vote and everything, but like, I don't know, like, which one is the good team? Like, which one's the good team that like cares about old people and poor people and black people and stuff? And another girl's like, oh, that's the Democrats. The Democrats are like the nice ones, and the Republicans are the ones that like want to take away old people's Medicare and stuff, you know? And they're like, yeah, that's it. I'm a Democrat. That's what I'm gonna. And I just had to be like, don't say anything, Rachel. They will you know, come for you with pitchforks. Like, even then I knew, like, don't start correcting them and telling them anything, because they're just gonna like emotionally lash out. But this was when I really first started thinking about, yes, I'm a woman and I'm kind of paying attention to politics, but I don't know if it's worth it just so that like some of us who are generally more informed can vote to have all of these kind of girls voting. And I'm going to do a show at some point about all the research that has been done on female voters. Women are now like one of the largest voting blocs, so there's tons and tons of research. There's mountains of data, because of course every political campaign of the last 40 years wants to know how to get the women's vote. So they've done massive market research on female voters, and I do want to go over some of that with you guys, because the data on it is crazy. Basically, women vote exactly how, like, the worst you would imagine is how most of them vote. It's stuff like they won't vote for a candidate who's bald. They won't vote for a candidate who's short. They vote more for candidates who have a tan, that kind of stuff. Like, the most shallow crap is how they vote for the most part. And everybody just wants to talk about exceptions. Well, what about this exception? What about that exception? What about this exceptional woman who's different than all the other women? And it's like, yeah, but we don't make rules of society based on all the exceptions, right? So yeah, Evelyn is laughing at me. It's, look, I wish it wasn't like this. I wish it wasn't this way, but I'm old now, and my bar of how much I care is just, it's really low. So I know that some people find me horrific and offensive, and think I'm terrible and think I'm mean. But when you get older, one of the good things is like you just stop giving a shit, and you're like, look, I just want to help stem some of the insanity, because my kids and my grandkids have to live in this world, okay? So like, let's just not with all this silly stuff that's going on. What else are you guys talking about? Looking for financial advice on an anti-feminist channel. Uh-oh. What's going on in here? My sister thinks Republicans want to ban being black. Yeah, totally. Dude at work just told me 70% of Democrat votes are females. That sounds about right based on what I've seen. Basically, this is the paradox of women voters. I talked a little bit about this before, but if you guys are new, if you're a person who cares about democracy, right? Because this was the argument of all the suffragists and the people who were progressives 100 years ago and wanted women voting. They would say it's the most democratic. One person, one vote is the most democratic. Now, first of all, our country was not founded as a straight universal suffrage democracy. It was not intended to be that. That's what it became, but that's not how it was founded. Even if you don't care about the founding, if you're a person who values democracy and you want to limit tyranny and you want freedom and liberty for all, the best way to destroy any chance of that is to have women vote. How do I know this? How can I demonstrate it? Well, easily. Because if you look at when women started voting, from there is when the welfare state started growing, the income tax began just before, which is part of the reason they wanted women voting and working outside the home, is because it could double the income tax base, right? So if you're these elite scumbag bankers who wanted to pass the income tax and put the Federal Reserve in, you definitely want women working and you definitely want women voting. Why? Because women always vote for security and safety. So you could not have had this massive welfare state. You couldn't have daddy government stepping in and basically taking over in family courts for men, which is what we have. If you look at the out of wedlock births in 1950, it was super low. It was like this tiny percentage. And welfare spending in 1950 was super, super low. And this is adjusted for inflation. Okay, I know how to read data. So adjusted for inflation, if you plot out of wedlock births and welfare the last 70 years, they go like this. Whoop, they go up in tandem with each other in perfect lockstep, just like this. So to the extent you have out of wedlock births, you're going to have a bigger welfare state because women who have out of wedlock children are going to vote for more welfare state. People who know them and feel bad for them are going to work. It creates like this cycle. So you get a big welfare state. Then we had a certain thing happen in 2001 in the month of September, which scared the hell out of everybody. And they passed something called the Patriot Act. And they created the NSA, and they created this giant surveillance state, right? Well, none of that would have ever passed either without women, because women wanted to perpetuate that. They were the most in favor of it. They want a nanny state. They want security. They want safety. They want daddy to come in and like make things fair, make things equitable, right? So what happens, you start saying we want women to vote because we want democracy and we want freedom. And then by letting women vote, you get a nanny security state, massive surveillance state that is actually like, it has destroyed democracy. There is no liberty anymore. We saw that in 2020. There's no liberty. They just lock shit down. If you can panic the women and make them think a virus is coming to kill them, they will insist that you do crazy shit. Do you remember the arrows in the grocery store telling you which direction to walk up and down the aisles? And people thinking that was going to like save everyone's life? Do you remember them making kids wear masks to school and then cutting a little hole in it so they could still play their instrument in band? Do you remember the insane stuff that people were doing, like putting whole gas masks and stuff on to go outside? That's women, that's moms going, put on your coat. I don't want you to catch a cold. We have to be safe. We have to, like that's more of a feminine thing. Whereas the men, at least in my state, they were marching to the Capitol and demanding that their businesses be reopened. Point blank. And then at the same time, we had counter protests going on because of BLM stuff that was simps, like male feminists, Skittles people, and women. How many times do you see like some lady when Antifa and like Patriot Front or some conservative patriot organization? Yes, I know a lot of them are Fed infiltrated, but that's not the point. What I'm saying is the people that show up to these things, some little 5'2" woman will show up in leggings and flip-flops and actually attack like a 6'2" Marine veteran. Why do they think they can do that? Because they've watched too many Charlize Theron movies that make them think they can beat the crap out of like some giant man. And they also don't think there's going to be any legal repercussions, right? They feel totally validated and protected in behaving that way. So yeah, if you want liberty, democracy, freedom, any of that stuff, I'm not even saying I'm like a huge enjoyer of democracy, but if you are a person who's liberty minded, the last thing you want is women voting. The first thing they do is vote to take that away. And they vote to impose safety measures and security on everyone. And you want that in women, but that's also why you want that in women because they're good mothers, but you don't want women voting or being in politics or governing churches for those reasons. They're not going to hold the boundaries. They're going to dissolve the boundaries and try to include everybody and make everybody feel welcome and special and safe and all that kind of shit. So if that's what you want, fine. But if you're somebody who cares about like liberty or personal autonomy, well, it's just the same exact argument of like you'll see these pro-choice women arguing pro-choice things based on bodily autonomy. And my first comeback to them is, oh, you're a champion of bodily autonomy, are you? And they go, yes, I am. My body, my choice. And I go, okay, what about forced medical interventions? What about jibber jabber stabby interventions? Well, those they want to mandate. Those they do want to impose on you. So my bodily autonomy, but only if I want to kill a man's baby. bodily autonomy doesn't count if you don't want to be injected with globo homo juice, right? This is what you get. I'm just like, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you how it is. So let's see what else you guys have to say. I'm going to wrap it up in a few here. Also, my dono chat's pinned to the top if you want to support my grift and send me grift bucks. If you want to send me pick me bucks, you can do that on my dono chat link. Do you guys have any other questions? Oh, I've got a couple dono chats. Thank you so much, guys. Impromptu dono chat said, may God bless you and your family in Christ our Lord. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. And I hope the same for you as well. And this one is from Shame. It says, cheers. You're possibly an avenue provided by God for the restoration of my family as I joined the church. I married into a family with a sneaky feminism disguised in a religious spirit. Episcopal matriarchy, ? Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that, unfortunately. It's tough for men. Like, a lot of people discount how tough it is for men to be the people who always have to say no. Like, my husband used to talk to me about this. Like, he felt like the hardest part of having a family wasn't like working the long hours and you know, bringing home the bacon and all of that stuff. We have 4 girls plus me, so he's kind of outnumbered. And he would always say, like, I'm the guy that always has to say no, because me as the mom, like, even me being as sensible as I may be, my tendency is to want to indulge the kids. It's to want to be softer with them and more gentle with them. But sometimes what they really need is for dad to step in and just say no. No, you're not going to be walking out of the house in those booty shorts. That is not happening. I know everyone else is wearing them. I know it's hard to find modest clothing at the store, but you're not going anywhere in that. You know, he'd have to be the person who would always have to, like, put down the firm boundary and say no. And I think that that's harder for men than they think, because if you have to do that all the time and you're always the bad guy, like my husband used to say when there was like a period of time where we had like 3 teenage girls at once in the house, and then one that was like preteen, and he would always say, every day someone's going to cry. Every day I'm going to make one of them cry. I won't even have to say anything that mean. I'll just say something I didn't know was going to like hurt their feelings, and they're hormonal today, and one of them's going to cry. And sometimes it would be me, right? He would just say the wrong thing, and like I'm hormonal and I would cry. It's hard for the men to always have to be holding the line and putting down the boundaries and keeping the boundaries firm and all of that. It's like kind of exhausting for men to do. So I do feel for you if you kind of ended up in a situation where you married into a family where there was some feminism that you didn't see. I mean, that's going to be there. Even in the most like trad conservative families, there's going to be elements of this. It's just the culture. So I know that's tough, and I do have some sympathy for that. I don't know if I'm like the person who's going to save it. I highly doubt that. I do want to make an impact, but I think it'll be on a more individual level. Like the white pill for you all, if you want a nice white pill as we start winding down the stream. The white pill would be, I get messages daily from women saying, hey, I read your book, or I saw your debate, or I watched one of your videos, and it's really helping me because I really want a family. Like, I've met this nice guy, we're engaged, and my whole family is pressuring me that I have to finish college and do my career, and that, you know, they don't even like him because he's more of a traditional guy, and they want to see me with one of these soy boys where I'm in charge. You know, like they have, you know, liberal parents or even just kind of normie parents that want that for them. And they'll say, like, your stuff kind of, it gives me, number one, like a way to push back on that. But number two, it kind of like encourages me that my instant mother and a wife is okay. It's just, there's so many women who deep inside feel like that. They just don't feel like they can say it out loud. It's totally stigmatized. They feel like they'll be ostracized. Their friends are going to shame them. Their parents are going to be disappointed. We tell girls, you must go to college and you must have a career, almost as a prerequisite. Like, don't even look at men until you've got your own money and you're thoroughly insulated from bad men or anything that can go wrong. And they're like, you know, deep inside, they kind of know. They're like, but I really just want to get married and have kids. Like, that's what I want for myself right now. I don't want to finish like law school. I don't want to, start my corporate career. Like that sounds soul sucking and depressing and awful. And so they watch my stuff or they read my book and they feel like, okay, so my instinct is not wrong. Like I'm not the crazy one. This is not the weird thing. This is the normal thing historically. And so maybe I can find the courage to like go ahead and do this. So that's a lot of what I'm trying to do, if that makes sense. Rachel, have any recommendations for Orthodox homeschool curriculums? Yes, I did a stream about homeschool curriculums and how to choose them. And it's right here on the channel. And I have a bunch of links in the description for resources. I discuss a bunch of them and mention a bunch of them. So there's definitely some of that in that episode if you want to go check that out. Yeah, it's very exhausting. Yeah, for real. I feel for the men on this. Like these are the things that you just learn from being married and having a bunch of kids. And not very many people, less and less people are getting married, staying married, and having a bunch of kids, number one. And those who do, most of those ladies, God bless them, they are better than me. They're not on the internet running their mouth like I am. But if I'm going to be here running my mouth, I want it to be about important stuff like this. So that's kind of one of the reasons I try to share it. There's just no like, mid 40s women with 5 kids who've been married a long time out here on the internet talking about stuff. There's just not a lot of us. So I'm trying to kind of just be like, look, here's all the history. Here's all the philosophy. Here's all the data and the statistics. But also I do have some experience and I can tell you like how it's been for me and what I've observed and stuff like that. So I had one boyfriend that told me I had to make $100,000 for him to marry me. Yikes. Yeah, that's probably not the type of guy you want. There are some men doing that now though. And it's usually like a response to the MGTOW stuff. It's usually like a red pill thing where they're like, they really don't see marriage the way that we would, like from a Christian paradigm. They see it as like a huge risk. So they feel like, okay, you're either coming into this with your own money and like a prenup or we ain't doing it. And I understand like the rationale there. I'm good friends with Aaron Clary and he feels that way. He feels like he kind of takes the Rollo position on marriage. And I understand that, especially if they're not Christians. Like if I wasn't Christian, maybe I'd think that too. But because I am, I'm looking at like the scope of people's salvation and like the broad future of humanity. Whereas Aaron will tell me straight up, he's like, why should I give a shit about the future of humanity? He's my grumpy black pilled friend. But I understand where he's coming from. So, oh yeah, that's a good one. If your girls come home with that noise, you say, do you want to end up alone and referring to cats as your kids? That's the same thing I do when my kids didn't want to do any school stuff, which we don't have like a really hardcore curriculum we follow, but they have their days where they're not in the mood like anyone else, and we do have to get some stuff done. I would show them that little video clip of, I think it was Miss North Carolina when she was doing the Miss America pageant, and they asked her about maps. Do you guys remember that clip of her trying to talk about how poor kids don't have maps, and she sounds like just so dumb? And I'm like, do you want to sound like her? And they're like, no, okay, we'll do our homework. So anyways, it's almost 2:00. Endless spokesperson said, hi, Rachel, I saw you on Pearl's channel. How did you overcome feminism? The hard way. So like, this is another misnomer if you're new to me. I never had a 304 phase. I am 42. So when I was a young lady, it was like the late 90s, early 2000s. And things were definitely feminist, but they weren't as insane as now. Like there wasn't corn on everyone's phone yet. We didn't have smartphones. There wasn't OnlyFans. Like some of this stuff didn't exist. So it was a lot more sane 23 years ago. But I was just a normal person doing the normal stuff. So like I had a Marxist feminist mom who was like a radical feminist. I had like a conservative Rush Limbaugh dad who kind of is probably the reason I stayed sane. And then I had my grandma was like a huge force in my life because surprise, surprise, Marxist feminist mom didn't want much to do with mothering at all. So like we spent a ton of time with our grandparents. So that I think also helped me a ton growing up with a lady that she's 97 now and she's still here. So I had a lot of good influences that I think at least gave me a base of sanity. And then I saw my mom's life just like crash and burn. And I knew I didn't want that for myself. But I still made a lot of the common mistakes. I moved in with my boyfriend before we were married, thinking, oh, we'll get married at some point. This is just a practical thing to do, right? I don't want to live with my insane mom. And I need somebody to help me pay the bills. This makes sense. And this had been my boyfriend for 3 years. We dated all through high school. We're both from a small town. We knew each other since we were like 14. So it didn't seem that crazy, right? It didn't seem that radical, but it did not work out. I got pregnant, which I thought was great. He didn't. He was going through a lot of like personal issues, and having a baby on top of it freaked him out. It did not work out. So I did end up in the situation where I was not the woman who like initiated divorce or anything like that, but here I was alone. And it was really rough. It was like a major come to Jesus, like slap in the face from reality that started me on the journey. So that's kind of because I never wanted that. I never wanted a split up family like I had. I didn't want that for my kids. It was like devastating to me, like seriously devastating to me. I was very lucky that later I found this wonderful man who didn't mind that I already had, kids with some other guy. I have never taken that for granted. I think this is the attitude that women should have. I'm not saying hate on yourself. It's not like that. It's just realize the reality of the situation that you now have. I had 2 kids with a different guy. It narrows your choices. Like you just can't be expecting the world on a silver platter at that point. It is what it is. That's just how it is. I got really, really lucky and found a fantastic man who was like willing to overlook that because he felt like all the other things about me made it worth it. Still wasn't easy for him, but we're still together 16 years later, and he's a fantastic person. I couldn't ask for better. I still am always thinking someday he's going to realize that like he probably could have done way better than me. But that's why I like to bring him, cookies and steaks and whatever he wants because he deserves it. He's a fantastic man. So the kind of that. It was kind of like watching feminism destroy a lot of people around me, seeing that the modern way screwed me over and realizing that I had been kind of like hoodwinked, and because I wasn't thinking, I was just doing what everyone around me was doing. And like my mother totally approved. She thought it was fine for me to live with my boyfriend as a teenager. But yeah, I just had to take a look at it and be like, wow, I screwed up. Like I made some serious wrong choices here. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done that. And it was basically the only thing that saved me was me taking full responsibility for that myself, not blaming my parents, not blaming society, not blaming men, but saying to myself, okay, well, you made these choices. You are now in this situation, but maybe if you do some really hard work on yourself, you can still like get things back in gear. Maybe you can save it. Maybe I'm not beyond saving. So I did a lot of hard work on myself, with my attitude, with, treating men more respectfully, with not thinking I was just owed things or deserved things because I was young and cute, stuff like that. And so those changes helped me find like a really great guy. And, then we had children, and now we've got this lovely big family. So I'm very lucky though. Like I did the hard work and it worked out for me. So, oh, you guys, guess what? I have a surprise for you. You are so lucky you stuck around.
Oh, sorry. Did I balls the time up?
Yes, I know. I was just telling the chat. I said, I think I messed the time up. I'm so sorry. But thank you so much for popping in.
I thought it was 9 p.m. my time, which is what I'm sorry about that.
No problem at all. I just had told them, we'll probably reschedule. I think I messed up the time. So I was just sitting here regaling them with tales of my own life and how I got to do all this feminism stuff. But thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
All right. I don't know. There was an internet thing there. All right. Well, anyway, sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought it was 9 p.m. my time. I thought that's what it was. I guess all these American time zones, they're very confusing.
They are. They are. No worries about it at all. We're just so happy to have you here. Yes, my strategy here was if people hear what I say about feminism and they tell me I don't have any room to speak about it because, I don't have a gender studies degree, well, I'll just get a professor with a fancy accent to come on and really tell people about it. And then I'm beyond reproach. Isn't that how it works?
I've no idea, but no, I think it should be based on the quality of the arguments rather than the accent or any other consideration. I think it's 7 p.m. in the UK, says Rigovich. Yeah, exactly. I thought 7 p.m. was the time it was starting. I normally feel that people should be on time, and those that are not on time, there's no excuse for it. So I don't know what I did here. At 7 p.m. finish time. Oh, 7 p.m. finish time. Oh, it is my fault. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I think it's probably my fault. I probably confused you by specifying finish time because I knew you were in Finland. So don't worry about it at all.
Am I 2 hours late? Oh my God, I must have read it as British time. Oh God, I'm so sorry. Right, okay, wait a minute.
It's fine.
Okay, I'm here. I'm here now.
Well,
right.
I'm so happy to have you. I'm just so happy that you're here at all. So thank you so much for coming. I ordered your book, but I haven't gotten it yet. It couldn't get here fast enough, but I read or listened to every podcast and watched every video of you talking about this that I could. And I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. I thought it was so good. And I really, really enjoy your approach to this topic. So yeah, please tell us about witches, feminism, and the fall of the West.
Oh, well, it's quite vague. I mean, what aspect of it do you want to? Was it particularly piqued your interest?
Let's start with the fact that a lot of people have this conception, I think, due to Hollywood and movies, and then, of course, gender studies departments rewriting all the history, that witchcraft wasn't a thing, that witches didn't exist, that all of it is made up nonsense by religious zealots, right?
Well, no, that's it is religious zealots. I mean, that may well be true, but what particularly interests me is the evolutionary dynamics of witchcraft. What is witchcraft actually doing? And there are a number of points in which it is engaging in evolutionary terms. So first of all, if you look at contemporary witchcraft in somewhere like sub-Saharan Africa, then what basically happens is if a child can be considered in some way to be a drain on the community, a financial drain on a poor community, then a way is found, as it were, theologically, although that's perhaps too complex to call it a theology, but a way is found to justify getting rid of it. So, for example, if a child has cerebral palsy, they call it a snake child. They regard it as a snake. They say it is a witch. And so they either kill it or they take it out somewhere and leave it somewhere and it dies. If a child has any other sort of serious, if it's mentally retarded, they regard them as children that are not supposed to live. They take them out into the jungle and just leave them there. And of course they die. But they justify it in each case by saying that the child is a witch. So what witchcraft is, from that sort of harsh evolutionary perspective, is a way of essentially theologically justifying the removal from the community of those which are a drain on the community. Now, another aspect of witchcraft can be those which undermine the stability, the social stability of the community. And I think that's what was more pertinent to my book, Witches, Feminism, and the Fall of the West. So if you look in evolutionary terms, what has been found is that there is such a thing basically as group selection. So what are these groups, these ethnic groups of which we are a part? They are distinct, they are separated geographically, and so they end up being slightly genetically distinct. And this means that two random English people will have more genetically in common than a random English person and a random French person. And so it becomes in your interest to look after the inclusive fitness of your group and to make sure that your group survives, and in some circumstances to lay down your life for that group. what has been found in computer models is that the groups which are most likely to dominate other groups are high in positive and negative ethnocentrism. Positive ethnocentrism is internal cooperation and whatever. Negative ethnocentrism is fighting against the outsider. So high in positive and negative ethnocentrism, that's the group that tends to survive. So then we ask ourselves, how do we maintain a high level of positive ethnocentrism? Well, one of the ways we do so is by the institution of patriarchy. So if you have a system of, what does patriarchy do? The woman says to the man, okay, if you want to have sex with me, then you invest in me. The man says to the woman, okay, if I have to invest in you, then I get to control your sexuality, so I can be sure I'm not cuckolded, so I can be sure that I'm not, these are actually my children. Now, if you don't do that, if you don't institute that patriarchal system, then of course it means that men can never be 100% sure that their children are theirs. They cannot control their wives. They will always be thinking that their wives might be having affairs and cuckolding them. The result of that is intermale conflict. If you have intermale conflict, then obviously you are less positively ethnocentric. You are cooperating internally less, and therefore you will be more subject to being destroyed by a group that does have patriarchy, and that therefore reduces its level of intermale conflict by virtue of controlling female sexuality. Now, as the society becomes harsher, and this is very interesting, if you look in the High Middle Ages, it was warmer. We had the medieval warm period. It was easy. It was a very tolerant period. We were basically less religious in many, many ways than we were subsequently. Myself and my colleague Guy Madison proved this. We demonstrated using the Breeder's equation that we became more religious across time between the High Middle Ages and the Tudor period. We were more tolerant of Jews. We were more tolerant of homosexuality. We were more tolerant of Islam. We were more tolerant of women. And indeed, we were more tolerant of witches. Now, once you get down to it being very, very cold and whatever, and you get harsh levels of group selection, then of course this tolerance breaks down, because what are the witches doing? Well, they are undermining the patriarchal system, and what the patriarchal system is doing is ensuring that there is less intermale conflict. What they are also how are they doing this? Well, a lot of the women that were accused of being witches were independent women. They were widows that were financially independent, or they were spinsters that had their own businesses or whatever. Or they literally, and that's the second thing, what was the purpose of the church? The church had a monopoly on religion, and the church promoted patriarchy as the will of God. What a lot of these women did was set up their own alternative business, if you like, cunning magic it was known as, in which they would offer healing and things like this, basically an alternative church, an alternative to the church. So not only were they showing that women could survive outside of the patriarchy, which is undermining the patriarchy and challenging it, but they were also challenging the church, which itself promoted the patriarchy as the will of God. So these kinds of women that were known as cunning folk, would be accused of being witches. Why? Well, because they were undermining the patriarchy and undermining the system. That's the first group. The second group of people that would often be accused of being witches were prostitutes. Why? Again, because prostitutes were independent women. Prostitutes were essentially undermining the patriarchy. And remember, this whole notion of, it was so tolerated in the High Middle Ages to use prostitutes, but it becomes less tolerated. A third group of women, and they cross over to some extent, that would be accused of being witches, were just nasty women, just extremely nasty, unpleasant women. Now, what are those women doing? Well, you could argue they're just undermining social cohesion. They're creating negative social epistasis. They're causing problems. The community has to be united. It has to be high in positive ethnocentrism. Everyone has to get on. And these would just be very unpleasant women that would go around shouting at people and saying nasty things and cursing people. And this is in the context, of course, in which people genuinely believed in the witch's curse. I'm sure you've heard of the placebo effect. Well, there's also the nocebo effect, which is exactly the opposite, which is that if you genuinely believe it, then it can kill you. I mean, you get people that genuinely believe that they're allergic to nuts, and they're not. They're just paranoid, basically. They're just hypochondriacs, and they can die. And so this is a very serious thing. And there was a case in about 1610 in Pendle in Lancashire of this pin seller called John Laws, and he refused to sell some pins to this young girl who was from a family of cunning folk who believed herself to be a witch. And so she cursed him. And he, of course, believed in witchcraft. And as a consequence, it seems he had a stroke. That person was eventually executed for witchcraft. And she confessed to it. As far as she said, she felt guilty. So it's these kinds of people that undermine social cohesion, these kinds of nasty, unpleasant people. And there has to be a way in evolutionary terms to get rid of them. And the way to get rid of them was accusations of witchcraft. And so you find that at these times of particular want, and we have to remember that the 17th century, the mid 17th century was it was so cold. We got down to the Maunder minimum. It was so cold. And so there just wasn't enough food. The population was too high. There was lots of war, lots of intergroup conflict. And so obviously what you're going to get is attempts to find a way to expunge from the population those which challenge that, which permit the group to survive. And that's what witchcraft was basically doing. And then also just those that are parasitic on the community. A lot of the people that were accused of witchcraft tended to be old women, tended to be spinsters. But that's often the widows. That's just showing they're financially independent and they're a problem for the patriarchy. But also you've got to ask yourself, well, why are you a spinster? This is in a context in which most people were able to get married. Why weren't they able to get married? Well, often the reason was because they were physically ugly. And this was remarked upon at the time. And as I've looked at in my book, How to Judge People by What They Look Like, because there is basically a general mutational load which relates to the body and the mind, and the brain is 84% of the genome. On average, of course, there are exceptions. I cannot emphasize that enough. But on average, people that are going to be physically repellent are probably going to be mentally repellent as well. And so these were the kinds of people that we were dealing with, and witchcraft was used to remove them. And what I look at in the book, and we can look at this in a minute, is the way in which, in many interesting ways, these people were basically kind of proto-feminists. But we can look at that in a minute. So I've been yattering on for ages. So do you have any thoughts?
I do, and I love your yattering. So please yatter. But I have my own little book here. About kind of the occult roots of some of the feminist movement, and how this was not just some kind of grassroots social movement that people think it was, where, women looked around one day and they said, I'm so oppressed, I must do something. So they marched and they got the right to vote and all this other stuff. And people don't want to believe this sort of thing. Like I said, I think a lot of the Hollywood movies give people the idea that witches weren't a thing. They never existed. It was just these poor innocent women who were doing nothing wrong. And then people for no reason began to persecute them and murder them. And it's so interesting that you said in the mid 1600s was this like period where everything got very cold and the pressure for selection and survival was on. I like to bring up the instance of Catherine Monvoisin or Lavoisin in France. She was around in the mid 1600s, and she was a French fortune teller, commissioned poisoner, professional provider of sorcery, and she was a true witch. And she was probably one of the most prolific poisoners in history. They think she poisoned maybe up to 2,500 French aristocrats. She would get paid to perform black masses for people. A lot of the king's concubines or like his mistresses would go to her and would compete with each other and say, cast spells so that, the king will marry me instead, or that I can be the top dog in the harem type of a thing. But she was providing abortions. She was, creating tinctures and spells and all this sort of stuff. So to assert that there were never witches, that there were women throughout history who openly proclaimed to be witches and talked quite liberally about it. Now, she ended up being executed, for all these poisonings and everything as well. But yeah, I think you talk a lot about some of these women and how everybody thinks there were only forced confessions, but many of them just openly.
No. Well, that's the problem when you're talking about things that happened in France or things that happened on the continent. There was the use of torture. And so the problem there is that obviously you start getting these quite fantastic, and even in Scotland, there was the use of torture. So we shouldn't really take those, and that was what inspired Macbeth, of course, what was confessed to in Scotland, sinking the king's ship and stuff like this, the Berwick witch trial. North Berwick witchcraft. But the problem here is that there was the use of torture. Now, England is a very interesting case because there was no torture. There was no torture. And also, it was a legal system that was incredibly skeptical of witchcraft, and in which a very high standard of proof was needed. And in general, women that were put on trial for witchcraft were found not guilty for this reason. So then witchcraft trials in England, perhaps with the exception of the fervour that took place with the Witchfinder General Matthew Hopkins in Eastern England during the Civil War. But apart from that, they're quite an interesting source of information. And again, a source of information with regard to what are we getting rid of? What is being removed from the body politic? And it's basically people that can be regarded as congenitally antisocial. Those people will pass on their genes and whatever, and these traits are highly heritable. But in general, the people that were executed were old women, so that's not relevant. But what they can do is subvert the functioning of society at the environmental level, make it function less well, make it less positive and negative ethnocentric, make it work less well, make it more of a problem, and make you more likely to be invaded or whatever. So if we look at it becomes quite interesting if we think about what we were selecting for across time. We can conceive broadly, I mean, it's a bit of an oversimplification, of two kinds of people, two life strategies. The first is what we call a fast life history strategy. This is that you are evolved to an environment that is easy. Food is on the trees, it's all around you, but it is unstable. There's lots of parasites, lots of things that kill you very suddenly and unpredictably. So what you have to do in that context is live fast, die young. You have to have as many offspring as you can, have as many offspring as you can, with as many people as you possibly can, and just hope that some survive. There's no point investing energy in any given offspring because it could just be randomly wiped out. So that's what you do. This means you mainly invest your energy in sex. You invest very little in nurture. It also means that you have to be aggressive. You have to be impulsive. That there is no selection in favor of being mentally stable because it's just no need to be mentally stable, and that interferes with the ability to be aggressive and impulsive and whatever anyway. And so basically you have the selection of people that are mentally unstable, that are low in agreeableness, because what's the point of cooperating with other people? It might never be paid back, and are low in impulse control, those kinds of people. Now, as we move away from that, as the carrying capacity of the ecology for the particular species is reached, then of course inherently the environment starts to become harsher, and it starts to become more competitive, and it starts to become, in a sense, more predictable. Suddenly you're competing with other people of the same species for scarce resources. Now, in that context, if you simply invest all of your energy in sex and nothing in nurture, then all your offspring could just die, because they're not adapted at all to the ecology. They need to be adapted to fight, to compete in the battle, in this harsh yet predictable battle for resources with other people. Now, what that means is you start to take energy away from sex and you put energy towards nurture. You have a smaller number of children with a smaller number of sexual partners, and you invest heavily in them to make sure that they are optimally adapted and able to cope in their environment and find a niche in which they can cope. This result is that life slows down, childhood gets longer so that you can learn more, people become less instinctive and more environmentally plastic so that they can learn more and they can be more flexible and they can find a niche in which they can survive in this increasingly difficult ecology. And the nature of the personality starts to change. You need to have groups and things to survive in an ecology like that. So agreeableness goes up, altruism, empathy goes up, conscientiousness, impulse control goes up, neuroticism, that's negative feelings, anger, jealousy, depression, anxiety, whatever, starts to go down, and you get what we call a more K-selected people. Now, a group-oriented people, if you like, rather than an individually oriented people. When I say individualism, I don't mean individualism in the sort of American Ayn Rand sense. I mean individually oriented in the sense that you're selfish, you're Machiavellian, and you're concerned just about you. as opposed to being group oriented. We have these 5 moral foundations because we are a pack animal. We have to be concerned with our pack, but also we want to make sure as individuals that we get our fair share, and that we're not harmed, and that we can ascend the top of the hierarchy. Because with men, at least, it is the high status men that will tend to pass on their genes. I mean, among the Bushmen, only 40% of the Bushmen breed of the men, and they are overwhelmingly the high status men in a polygamous mating system. And so what you get is you get these individually oriented foundations of harm avoidance and equality, and you get the group oriented foundations of obedience to authority, of in-group loyalty, and of sanctity versus disgust, basically religion. And what that tends to involve, religion tends to take that which is adaptive, that which is good, and it sanctifies it, and it takes that which is bad for the group and it taboos it. And so now what's been found is that conservatives are about the same in all 5 moral foundations, whereas liberals are only really interested in the individualizing foundations. Now, evidently, what we were selecting for across time was obviously genetic health, genetic good health. Obviously, we were selecting for mental good health, and we were selecting, it seems, for the optimum balance of these different foundations. In other words, we were essentially selecting for pro-social kinds of people. That's what we were selecting for across time. Now, what that would imply, what happens if you select for something is it becomes pleiotripically related. It becomes bundled together. And so what we find even now, and by the way, we were selecting for religiousness. We know we were doing that. Religiousness is associated with fertility, it's a human universal, it's associated with mental health, it's associated with physical health, it's associated with group orientation, we were evidently selecting for that as well across time. And so all these things become pleiotripically related to each other, become bundled together. And you would expect any deviation from that would substantially be in the direction back towards our strategy, back towards the jungle, back towards individualism. And that is indeed the case, because deviations from this bundle, which all bundles together, religiosity, pro-social personality, physical health, mental health, they all bundle together, is associated with evidence of mutation. So people that are atheists or who are liberals, their faces are less symmetrical. They're objectively less good looking. They have objectively worse physical health. They have objectively worse mental health. They are shorter. They are less muscular. They in every way evidence that they are something that when we had 50% child mortality, which we did until 1800 in these very cold conditions, would have been purged. And what we're every generation, and what we're moving back towards now with our industrial revolution and the medical innovations and inoculations and improvements in standard of living and everything else that it's created, is an artificial warm period, is a movement back towards medieval Europe, or high Middle Ages, where it was much warmer, and a movement indeed back towards the jungle. And this brings me back to the witches and the connection with feminism, which is that the patriarchy is a function of a relatively developed society. There's not much in the way of patriarchy really among chimpanzees, not really. And even among very primitive humans, there's not much in the way of patriarchy. The men don't invest much in the women. The men essentially, to use the colloquial terms, the men basically pump and dump. And so the women don't expect anything in return. So patriarchy doesn't really, and female control, so it doesn't really develop, and you don't really get substantial differences between men and women. The level of sexual dimorphism in parts of Africa is not very high at all, because the women have to basically take on masculine roles. They're going to be on their own looking after the children. So they are more physically and more mentally masculinized. The psychological and the physical difference between the sexes in that context is smaller than as you move to Europe, where it is much bigger and there are much clearer sex roles. And then as you move to East Asia, it's even bigger. So that's the kind of women. That's the kind of women these witches were. These witches were fast life history strategy women. These witches were, remember, the nasty women shouting at you, screaming at you, cursing you, low agreeableness, very nasty people. And the reason I've had to give all of this illustration, bear with me, but it is relevant, is something which was emerged in the 17th century, not under torture, but something which was quite clearly going on, which there's these women, these old women, with no inducement, would confess to things like, the devil appeared to me in the form of a black man and had sex with me from behind for 5 consecutive nights. Or the devil appeared to me as a goat and sucked my dugs until they were sore, and such like. And and what these are, as far as I can see, the most parsimonious interpretation of these, because they were adamant that these things had happened, were rape fantasies.
Yeah.
And it's been found that approximately 60% of women have these rape fantasies, but that the more sociosexual you are, i.e., the more R strategy you are, the more promiscuous you are, the more likely you are to have these rape fantasies. Now, why is that the case? Well, what actually is the rape fantasy? In the jungle, in the world of the jungle, where men and women are basically relatively physically equal, okay, men are a bit stronger, the only way you can be sure that the man is the right man for you, who, if you have babies by him, those babies will be strong and tough and aggressive and will survive, is that he can overpower you. That's the way that you know. And so, in a sense, it is a rape, right up to the moment when he actually, and you're fighting him off right to the very last until he actually overpowers you. And at that point, it kind of stops being rape, because with these kinds of women, you realize, okay, he's the dominant man, he's the alpha male, and so therefore he's the kind of person I want to procreate with. In much the same way, a good comparison is when women get pregnant. It is not the romantic experience that is portrayed in Look Who's Talking or Look Who's Talking Too, where the egg it can't wait to be wooed with chocolates and roses by one of these seamen. No, the seamen are treated as an enemy to be destroyed, and everything is thrown at them: vaginal mucus, white blood cells, everything you can think of to try to destroy them. And then finally, the one strongest semen, or sperm, sorry, the one strongest sperm eventually manages to get through. And again, at that point, it's no longer rape. At that point, that's the one that the ovum wants. So these rape fantasies are a reflection of being a fast life history strategist, of being the kind of person that is not adapted to the kind of highly positively and negatively ethnocentric ecology that we need, a group rather, that was needed in order to survive in the battle of group selection. That's what these women therefore were. They were fast life history strategists. Now, move forward in time to the more recent data, and what do you find? There is a weak correlation. It's weak, but it's there, between feminist identification and rape fantasy. Why? Because what are these feminists? They are masculinized women. They are the women of the savannah. They are masculinized women. And that's why they can't cope with the patriarchy, and they subvert the patriarchy and whatever. They're individualists. They're like men. They want power. They want autonomy. They don't want to be controlled. They don't want to be submissive. They're not evolved to be like that, because they are high in mutation. They are a movement backwards towards an ecology in which there was no patriarchy and in which women were not like that. That's what they are. As our selection pressures have weakened, as child mortality has fallen from 50% to 1%. Then you get this massive buildup of mutation, this massive buildup of people that, to a certain extent, I mean, not entirely, but to a certain extent, could have survived on the savannah. They'd be fine. And so the psychology of the savannah, which is highly masculinized women, for example, makes a comeback. And then you get these feminists, you get at these witches who are the same, who parallel psychologically these witches that you had in days of yore. It's the same psychology. And it seems to be no coincidence. And I look at this in Witches, Feminism and the Fall of the West. I mean, who was the ultimate feminist in recent decades? It was Andrea Dworkin, of course. And what did Andrea Dworkin, who preached that all sex was rape, which is exactly what you'd think like if you were on the savannah, wouldn't you? All sex is rape. And Andrea Dworkin, who preached all this stuff. And Andrea Dworkin, towards the end of her life, I don't know, she got drunk or something in a Paris hotel, and she had this rape fantasy about a bellboy having raped her, and she woke up insisting that she'd been raped, for which there was no evidence. And remember, she was this 57-year-old, fat, hairy, disgusting.
As hideous as you could be.
You couldn't get more unlikely to induce tumescence in a young man. But even her own friends, even her supporters, thought she was going mad. So that's basically what I highlight in the book, that this idea that that they try to promote in the media or whatever, these witches were just poor random people who happened to get accused of witchcraft, and isn't it terrible? No, it was they were a particular kind of social irritant, and for sound evolutionary reasons in general. Although, of course, there were exceptions. There was hysteria. I mean, look at the kind of hysteria that occurred at Salem. But in general, it was an evolutionary means to justify removing from the society those which were a problem in terms of precipitating the optimally functioning group-selected and thus patriarchal and so on social organization.
Yeah, so in my book, one of the things I talk about is how some of the more ancient cultures that had goddess worship, they would have, temple prostitutes. They would have women who were kind of like witches of the time, and they would have full moon orgies purposefully so that the men could not establish paternity for the children that might result from such a thing. And it was another way to kind of keep more power in the hands of the woman and less in the hands of the men and things like that. But I also frequently argue that there's a reason we don't see, at least in more modern times, feminism becoming the dominant cultural force until after the Industrial Revolution, and that technology has created this illusion for women that they no longer need men, that they can do everything on their own, that they're strong and independent. And as I always say, if the lights were ever to go out, if the power was ever to be out for an extended period of time, you'd see feminism rapidly just kind of disappear. Nobody's a feminist when, the grid goes down. What are your thoughts on that with technology and the Industrial Revolution? And
well, if I think about what happened in England, which is what I research in the book, then with the Industrial Revolution, obviously you get this growing rise in mutation. You get all of the you get all of these people that are therefore going to be that would have died under normal conditions, but they live due to vaccinations and whatever, and those people are more likely to have maladaptive inclinations that we were not selecting for under harsh Darwinian conditions, and that's going to include not submitting to the patriarchy. And there's a very interesting stuff by Menelaus Apostolo, who's a Greek researcher, and he's shown that basically we're evolved to the patriarchy. Men are evolved to select women that are submissive to the patriarchy because it's a sign that they're not going to cuckold them. Women are and also men are evolved to select for religious women for the same reason, and that's why women are more religious than men, and women are evolved to select for patriarchal men, and indeed they are attracted to benevolently sexist men, because those are the kind of men that are going to look after them and whatever in prehistory and make sure that their offspring survive. Now, what you're going to get then is a rise in these deviations from the norm after the Industrial Revolution. That's the first thing. What you're also going to get, what also happened was that there was this massively disproportionate number of women. So for various reasons, boys are dying in industrial accidents, boys are going into the empire, whatever. There's just far too many women. Yeah. And there's two reactions to that. One is that you get a kind of runaway patriarchy submission, which is that the women just do everything they can to conform and so that they're more likely to get a man, and that's substantially what happened. But the other is going to be that you're going to get the kind of female equivalent 100 years ago or 130 years ago of the incel. That's going to just, particularly if they're that psychological type that gets angry and bitter and is high in mental instability, and those people are going to give up on the whole thing and be the female equivalent of the incel. And I think what the female equivalent of the incel was the feminist, was those that were particularly among the more educated classes, those that were campaigning for votes of women or whatever. Overwhelmingly, the women that were campaigning to join the Women's Political and Social Union were spinsters, were upper and upper middle class women over the age of 50 that were basically just extremely bitter, and they were stereotyped as well as being very masculine, very mannish. So basically, you've just got this rise for genetic reasons, I imagine, due to mutation of women of this kind, and it comes at the same time as that there's just nowhere near enough men for them to marry, and they're from the Jane Eyre type. I mean, this sort of thing. Okay, she perhaps gets married in the end, but you know what I mean. Some of them become governesses. There's not much they can do if they're in the upper class. It's very hard to work. So eventually you get the rise of this, and these incredibly aggressive women. I mean, this woman, Helen Davison, is that her name? The one that was killed by going under the king's horse. I mean, she approached someone that looked like David Lloyd George at Aberdeen railway station and hit him in the face with a whip just because he looked like David Lloyd George. I mean, this woman was mental. And I mean, she threatened to bomb people's houses. They blew up post boxes. They smashed windows. These were these incredibly aggressive, unpleasant women. And so you just get the rise of these people, probably because of high mutational load or whatever, and within the upper class. And I think that's where, and the upper middle class, where they're more significant, where they're more able to adopt these kinds of ideas, and where they've got access to wealth and whatever. And so there's not going to be a big problem with them doing so. And so those people were, I think, the beginnings of feminism in the UK. And I think you're right that then once you get into a situation where women simply don't need men, because they can work, because the environment is so easy, because there's so much resources, because there's nothing to worry about, because the state basically becomes the man, then it's much, much, much easier for them to adopt degrees of feminism. The question is, well, how far do you take it? I mean, we really have got to a point now where it's tipped the other way, where it's men that are discriminated against. We live in a society where, I mean, 85% of primary school teachers in England are now women. About 70% of secondary school teachers are now women. I mean, they're dominating the system, and they're pushing these feminizing values. Women are interested. I mean, the whole nature of women's friendships and women's whole way they see the world is completely different from that of men. And this is kind of taking over the universities. This idea that you put social harmony and conformism and harm avoidance and the feelings of equality above everything else, above truth. I mean, if you look at the research by Simon Baron-Cohen, the extreme male brain is systematic, it's autistic, it's that you systematize, but you're empathy blind. The extreme female brain is the opposite. You're hyper empathy, but you are system blind. So you put empathy, by which I mean concern with feelings and equality and everyone getting along, above everything else, including the pursuit of objective truth, which is a major problem for the universities. With these basically witches have taken over some of the universities now. So this is not good for society. But yeah, these feminists do, as I said, the key point I wanted to make is that the parallels between the witches in the 17th century, admittedly, they were near the bottom of society often, and the feminists of the proto-feminists of the 20th century, although they were from the top of society, that's why they had intellectual nous, are fairly clear to me in terms of their psychology.
Yes. I actually include in my own little book here some posters from the suffrage era. One here with the little girl about to beat the little boy with the rolling pin there, and she's saying, "You believe in women's suffrage, don't you?" And it was a particularly violent movement. These women were basically terrorists. And
there's a guy called Simon Webb who's written a very interesting book on the violence of these women. They were absolutely terrorists. There were other and they weren't the Emmeline Pankhurst, that group. They were not campaigning for votes for women. That's bollocks. They were campaigning for votes for upper class women. They wanted the vote for upper class women. They did not want working class women to vote, and they did not want working class men to vote. They wanted themselves, i.e. upper class. It was an individualistic, selfish movement. They wanted people like them, i.e. upper and upper middle class women, to be able to vote. And they were actively against the extension of the franchise to working class men, let alone working class women.
Yes, exactly.
And then it's interesting as well in terms of the psychology of these people. A lot of them, there's a certain psychological type basically psychopaths, that are attracted to extremism and are attracted to intense danger. It's very, and authoritarianism and violence. And one of the things that Simon Webb documented was the substantial degree to which, they were very pro World War One, which a lot of people in retrospect regard as the most appalling massacre. But they were highly nationalistic. They were right wing. In so many ways. That's what I mean. This was a right-wing society, a conservative society, a society there, and women tend to be socially conformist, and so therefore, in a highly right-wing society, you get the church ladies, you get the women being more right-wing than the men. Now it's flipped over the other way, because it's a left-wing society, and women are more socially conformist, and they're more left-wing than men. But in a right-wing society, they're more right-wing than men. They were extremely right-wing and extremely conservative and extremely pro-war. And they stopped their campaign for female suffrage precisely because World War One started, and then they started this campaign, finding men that weren't signed up and putting white feathers in them and stuff like this to humiliate them. They were completely pro the slaughter of World War One, and then after World War One, in the chaos that preceded it, they got what they wanted. They got the vote for women who were householders who were single over the age of 30 or whatever it was. But then you get all the vicissitudes of the interwar period, and a substantial number of women that were involved in the WSPU joined the British Union of Fascists and were organised the British Union of Fascists, which is a violent pro-Hitler organisation. So, I mean, these are people that they're attracted to danger, they're attracted to violence, that they're fast life history strategists, which is just what I said the witches were, and it's just what these proto-feminists were. They're women that are like men, that are manlike, and have a desire for power and have a desire for all that is manlike, because that's kind of psychologically and perhaps even physically, that was commented on at the time, how mannish they were, of what these people were like.
Yeah, it's funny. I love that you brought that up, because I've made this argument that it's, especially here in America, it's so ironic because the people here at the turn of the century who wanted suffrage, which, by the way, it was incredibly unpopular with average women. There was far more membership in anti-suffrage groups among women. Ironically, the suffragists blocked several referendums to let women vote on whether they wanted the vote, which is kind of a meta irony, I guess. But in any case, once they got the vote, based on this idea that we'll have more liberty and more democracy if all the women are voting, because why not let half the people vote? You get the exact opposite. If you are somebody who wants more liberty, more democracy, by letting women vote, you end up with the opposite. Within just a short period of time here, we ended up with a massive welfare state, a massive security state. Women are voting for security and protection and safety over liberty at every chance that they get. And if you look at the number of out of wedlock births from 1950 to now, and the amount of welfare spending from 1950 to now, they go up exactly in tandem with each other, right along a graph.
Well, I think we should. It's important to look at the difference, the fundamental difference between male and female friendships. I mean, this is very, very interesting. There's a very interesting book by Joyce Benenson called "Warriors and Warriors," as in, warriors as in people that worry, and warrior as in people that fight, which looks at these fundamental differences. Men are evolved to form armies. They are adapted to form large polities, large groups of people that mutually cooperate for their own interest. And this means that men will tend to have large numbers of not very, relatively superficial but of not that closely bonded friends. And they will change friends easily. They will change friends according to where they live. These are alliances, and the alliances make sense according to context and so forth. It's very rare for a man of my age, I'm 42, to still have a friend that they were at school with. It's very, very rare. It doesn't really happen like that. Now, with women, it does, because the whole friendship system is different with women. Women are evolved to a system of polygamous mating. They are evolved essentially to a harem. And in that context, that's until so recently what our situation was. High status males with lots of wives. It is clearly better to be the co-wife of a very high status male than to be the one wife of a very low status male. And so that's what we in purely mercenary financial terms. And so that's what we revolve to. Now, what you get in that context, of course, is the women, as they move, as the new young nubile wife comes along and he's paying less attention to the older ones, they have to get other co-wives to help them out. They have to get other co-wives to babysit, to allo-parent their children. Now, to do this, they have to create, obviously, children. So you create a very, very strong bond with your friend, a very strong bond, about where you tell each other secrets and your vulnerabilities, and you share the deepest, most insecurity-inducing information and so forth, so that the bond is strong. Now, obviously, you can only do that with a relatively small number of people. So what women end up with, in contrast to men, is a small number of very, very intense, one from a male perspective, one-on-one friendships. And they nurture those friendships and they invest a lot in those friendships. Now, with men, if I'm going to go out with some friends on Saturday night, and if some new person comes along, I might ask you, hello, how do you do? Come and sit down, have a beer. That's not necessarily how women think at all. They might think, oh, this person might try and poach my friend. With the result, my daughter has talked about this to me, and I was amazed. I won't invite this person out with us. Why not? She's not part of our group, She's not part. She didn't use the word, but she's not part of our clique. She's a danger.
Yes.
And so,
yeah, I have 4 daughters, and they all go through the same thing, especially when they start heading towards like puberty, is really when the friends get jealous of each other and they're vying for her attention. And all 4 of my daughters have gone through that.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like Sex and the City is not just complete nonsense. I mean, it does have elements, kernels of truth to it. And so that's what you end up with. And then in that context as well, a friendship has to be a matter of a complete equality. If you deviate from that, if you're trying to get more, if you're trying to stand out to get more attention from the man, from this hypothetical Mr. Big, then you're the queen bee and you're a problem and you must be ripped down. And secondly, of course, just naturally, women are extremely neurotic. They are warriors because they have to be, because they've got to look after the children and whatever and so on. So then you get this promotion above everything else of equality and everyone feeling validated and looked after, and their feelings aren't hurt and all this, and of harm avoidance. And then naturally you get these women and you get them jobs in, let's say, what was the first bastion to fall? I don't know, departments of education at universities, the most wishy-washy subjects that have no scientific standards.
Right.
And in they come, and gradually they take over the department, and then of course it is recast in their own image. And what are women in history? What were women really doing at that kind of age, in their 20s or 30s or 40s, when they're academics and so on? Well, they were looking after children. And so gradually you just turn the whole thing into a nursery school where you have speech codes and you have certain words you can't say, and everyone has to be validated and listened to, and you can't just say to somebody, you're talking bollocks, shut up. And this carries on until you get a kind of runaway process of this, because people that are intelligent tend to be conformist and they tend to want power, and they realize the benefits of conforming, and they have the effortful control to be able to conform, and so they competitively signal whatever the in thing is. And eventually we get to a point now where, well, first of all, you have to say, okay, children can identify as whatever gender they like, and this must be accepted, and you must use their accepted pronouns, and that's that. And now it's that they can identify as animals, they can identify as foxes. And you can't just question it. You can't say no, you're deluded and you're wrong. You're wrong. Because even the notion, the male notion, remember, the autistic notion of systematizing, of logic, of objective truth has to submit to empathy, to harm avoidance in that very narrow sense of feelings and not being hurt. And of notions of equality, and therefore that you can't impose one idea over another. I don't know how far it will go. I suspect it will go so far. We haven't had one of these for a long time, not since the 90s, as a sort of mass suicide cult. And we haven't had David Koresh, I'm thinking, Waco. There were a few others in the late 90s. This Halle Bopp thing.
Heaven's Gate was one.
Heaven's Gate, that's the one. And overwhelmingly, Jim Jones, that was a bit earlier, of course. But overwhelmingly, they tend to be women, because women are more conformist. They're easier to indoctrinate. They're more religious.
Yeah.
And so what I would suspect, if things carry on like this, is eventually we're talking woke cult, white young girls killing themselves, and it might take something like that to shake society out of this, or that, or a war. Because often when you get runaway individualism, it eventually comes up against a war. It kind of did in the form of COVID, in the sense that suddenly, during the height of COVID, when lots of people were dying, we weren't talking about wokeness anymore for a while. Right. But then, of course, it hit back in with a vengeance once the summer came. Almost like there'd been all this desire to virtue signal that had been pent up, and almost like mortality salience tends to make you more religious. But the religion that these people have been inculcated with was like the worship of equality or whatever. I mean, rather than the worship of a moral God. And so you had this massive sort of religious revival, essentially, in the form of the George Floyd disturbances and Black Lives Matter and so forth. Basically, I wrote about this at the time, a kind of basically an ersatz religious revival. In the 50s, in the wake of World War II and all that, you had a religious revival. Billy Graham been brought up with that kind of religiosity. That kind of religiosity has increasingly broken down, and it's only the people, like the remnant normal population, that would have survived in pre-industrial times, basically, the people that are high in genetic, mental, and physical health and so forth, that seem to hold on to that kind of religion now, and most other people no longer inculcated with it, because you've got to remember that you got all this building up a mutational load, but you still had a society that was conservative and was pushing people along the adaptive roadmap of life. And this included inculcating them with a group-selected adaptive religion. With the breakdown of that, you have all these people that are being pushed along a maladaptive roadmap of life and are being inculcated with a maladaptive kind of religion, and have a psychology which makes them prone not to the collective worship of a moral God under times of stress, which is what the norm is to hit in, but to perhaps to other things in times of stress, as the religious bundle that we were selecting for, which involved, over-detective agency, which involved over-detection. Of course, it breaks up, and so in those times of stress, they end up with all kinds of unusual, magical thinking and weird stuff, and over-detection of agency, but also over-detection of causation, paranoia, conspiracies, whatever, and maybe that's what happened. But it did come up against COVID, and it did calm down for a bit. So it may come up against some kind of serious war, in which people are deprived. And then there's this, have you heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yes. Absolutely.
And so there could be this idea that with COVID, we kind of moved down the hierarchy of needs. And so this idea of decadent things like being validated as an individual or whatever became less important than just surviving. Right. And now we've moved back up the hierarchy of needs fairly quickly.
Yeah, so I do debate feminists quite often, not because I have any delusion that I'm going to change their mind, although that has happened a couple times. I've converted a couple of them live in a debate before. But I had this little clip of me debating a feminist that went viral because I asked her a very simple question, which is, women have been able to do whatever job they want for about 100 years now, and we don't see them knocking down the doors to do things like power line work or, laying concrete or treating sewage water, any of the dirty, dangerous jobs. We just don't see feminists just like knocking down the doors for equal representation in those career fields. And I asked her, if the power went out, if there was a massive ice storm and all the power lines went down, do you think women could get the power grid back up and keep it running? And she just sputtered and didn't know what to say, and she acted like the question was crazy. And then she ended up finally biting the bullet and asserting that she and her feminist pals were going to go out in the ice storm and get the power lines back up and the power grid running again. And people just couldn't believe she was willing to bite such a bullet and assert such a thing. But I run into this all the time, and I wonder what your thought is on these feminists trying to have two completely opposing worldviews that end in cognitive dissonance, where they insist that they're strong and independent, and then also that they're a victim.
But it doesn't. Well, no, it doesn't surprise me at all. If you're But let's go back to the psychology of the jungle that we talked about. So basically, what we have moved away from, what these individualists are like, they are high in psychopathology. They are thoroughly selfish, unpleasant people. They are high in mental instability. And that then leads to three interesting things. The first is Machiavellianism. If you are highly mentally unstable and you feel negative feelings strongly, then you will be paranoid, and you will want to have power over other people, and you will want to control people and all of that sort of thing. And so therefore, you will desire power. However, if you feel these negative feelings strongly, then also you will feel all kinds of fear and all kinds of unpleasantness and all kinds of nasty feelings and whatever. Now, one way that you can deal with that is via developing a kind of narcissistic false self, in which you tell yourself that you are brilliant and you are morally perfect and whatever, and you are wonderful, and you will act in order to achieve that. Now, there's no need, if that's what motivates you, there's no need for you to be logically consistent. What you will engage in is motivated cognition. You will think in such a way that it makes you feel good about yourself, because you are narcissistic and you have a very strong desire to be admired, and you have a very strong desire to be able to convince yourself that, even though you don't really feel it maybe, but to convince yourself that you really are wonderful and you really are great and you're perfect and you're better than other people, as a way of compensating for the fundamental sense of darkness and whatever that's at your very heart. And so there's no reason for people say, oh, well, these people are contradictory. Yes, they are. And they would see no problem with that. So it's perfectly, on the one hand, yeah, you can say, oh, I'm powerful and I'm strong. When you want to, I'm powerful and I'm strong, and don't you mess with me, you bastard. But then on the other hand, if it helps you to get power, maybe you're Machiavellian, it helps you to get power, you would, of course, victim signal. And in particular, if you are physically weak, or if you are paranoid because you're high in neuroticism and therefore you fear a fair fight, then of course you're not going to play for power in the way that some demagogue does and just openly play for power. You're going to do it covertly, which is what female power games among girl groups tend to be about. It's covert. You virtue signal, you kindness signal, you victim signal, in order to induce people manipulatively to give you what you want, which is more than your fair share of the resources, which is more than you really deserve. And you do so very, very subtly, and you get what you want. And also self-delusion can be extremely useful in maintaining a positive sense of self. If you can delude yourself, Joyce Benenson talked about this in the book Warriors and Warriors. You'll get women who will genuinely be convinced that they are very kind, nice people, and they would never act in a selfish way. They would never act in their own interests. They only act in the interests of them and their besties, and that. But yet somehow, subconsciously, they are acting in precisely their own interests, and ultimately they get the man they want. They get the man they really desire and they really want, and is just the person they absolutely want. And they will steal someone else's mate, and they will find they will find ways of justifying it. They will mate poach. They will do all of these kinds of things, but yet they will maintain a sense that they are kind and they are lovely and whatever. And so you shouldn't really be surprised, these people. It is, of course, contradictory to, on the one hand, say, I'm a strong person, I'm so strong, I am. Really, you're just reassuring yourself. You're not. If you need to say you're strong, you're probably not. It's like if you need to say you're famous. If you need to go around saying you're famous, you're probably not famous, are you? In much the same way, that's what they do. But then at the same time, I'm a victim. Oh God, I'm multiple marginalized, whatever. It's a way of, it's just they shouldn't be expected to be consistent, because consistency is not what they're about. Power and admiration and status is what they're about.
Well, that certainly makes a lot of sense in the context of my experiences with these kinds of women.
What are your experiences with these kinds of women? And why do you think, if you don't mind my asking, why do you think that you are somehow different?
Well, I think part of it is my personality for whatever reason. Maybe you can give me your analysis of this, but growing up, I was always like in smart kid programs, the things where they would put you in gifted programs and stuff like that. And I tended to be more of a tomboy, play with the boys more often than the girls, although I did have that core group of girl friends who were also in the Smarty Pants Club. And I had a radical Marxist extremist mother, and I watched her whole life kind of crash and burn before my eyes, and some of the insanity and chaos that she would sow. And my sister was much more like her, and I was much more like my dad. Then when I grew up and had my first daughter at 20, I wanted to stay home.
Do you mind me asking? Do you mind me asking? Why did you have your first daughter so young? It's quite young, 20, isn't it?
Well, I made the common mistake a lot of women did because my mother encouraged this. I moved in with my high school boyfriend, right? Wanted to get out of my mom's crazy house, and we had to, pay bills, so it seemed practical, and I ended up pregnant. Now, to me, this was a wonderful thing, but because I had decided I already wanted to have children and be a mom and a wife anyway, even though the expectation for me was that I was, of course, supposed to go to college. I had had all these years of preparation in the gifted programs to go to college, and by the time I got out of high school, I realized I didn't think school was really for smart people, and it wasn't to learn things. It was more to condition you to follow rules and obey things and whatnot. And I just, anytime I would question a teacher or anything like that, I would get in trouble. And so I just kind of got disillusioned with school in general and thought I could make my own way. And once I became a mother, well, that became the main thing in my life. There was nothing else that seemed at all important to me. But I was shocked that most of the women around me, even the ones who considered themselves to be maybe more conservative, they thought I was making a terrible mistake. My life was over. Like it was just, I was finished, and I shouldn't be depending on a man and staying home with my daughter. And I should put her in a daycare and go have a career. And I didn't want to do these things. So I got very good at defending my reasoning. And I have a very strong creative part of my brain, but I also tend to be really analytical. So I don't know, to me, it just looked like the feminist path led to chaos and destruction, and I grew up with that.
When you were younger, did you mainly have sort of male friends?
Yes.
And did you find these women difficult to deal with?
Yes.
And why was that? Why did you find them difficult to deal with?
Well, most of them cared a lot about things like being popular, which I didn't care about being popular. I had a lot of friends from a wide array of groups. Like I didn't really fit into one niche particularly. I had a lot of friends from a lot of different places in life, but I didn't care particularly about people's opinion of me or being popular. I cared more about like truth and meaning. Whereas I noticed that women, like the girls I grew up with, if a boy flirted with me that they liked, they would instantly hate me. And I'd think, well, I didn't do anything. I was just sitting here and he flirted with me. So it just felt so unstable. It felt like the chaos I grew up in with my mom and my sister, who screamed and yelled and threw things and were constantly having emotional meltdowns. And
was your father not there? Was your father not there? Was he left? Was he not there?
Oh, my mother kicked him out.
Oh, I see.
And he spent years fighting the court system, and eventually he did get custody because my mother was so unstable. But the years that I had to live with her and my sister, where it was anxiety inducing. You never knew what you were coming home to. It was like, are things going to be smashed? Will the phone be ripped out of the wall? It was pure chaos. And I didn't want that. I think it gave me a strong aversion to this feminine, chaotic, like emotional ups and downs all the time. Whereas if I went to my dad's for the weekend, things were more even keel, more predictable, more stable. My husband is a very stable, rational, like patriarchal kind of man. Who keeps order and things like that. So I don't know if it was a reaction to my childhood, or it could be any number of those factors. I also spent a lot of time with my grandmother, who's much older. She's 97 and still with us. And so I had a lot of influence from her, and she's a much more stable, agreeable, even-tempered kind of woman
on
too.
On your mother's side, this woman, or your father's side?
The one on my father's side.
Yes.
The one on my mother's side was also unbalanced and kind of crazy.
Okay, so you're basically your father married a woman with bipolar disorder or something like this.
Yes. Yeah, bipolar and schizophrenic. Yes.
Okay, so That's not a good background. And but then how did you? I mean, I noticed even behind you the Orthodox icons, and you use the Orthodox type cross that we have here in Finland in your Twitter bio. So how maybe I should have you on my channel and ask these questions here, but I might as well ask now because it interests me. So how did you end up becoming? Presumably, there's not many Orthodox people in America. So how did you end up involved in that?
Well, I tended to. So my mother is an atheist. My sister's an atheist. My dad was like a Dutch reformer, and
No, sorry, I'm just laughing because somebody called Living the Dream has said, "Tell me about your childhood, Clarice."
That's very funny. No, I found religion to be a stabilizing factor for me when my parents divorced. I started going to church with my friends, kind of kept to my dad's more conservative Protestant type of religion. But I grew disillusioned with it as I got older because now there's a lot of feminism and things like that coming into the church, and it's becoming much more feminized, and a lot of the perennial truths of it are being challenged by these liberalizing forces. So I started looking. When they shut down all the churches, I started looking, and I prayed and asked for God to help me find the right church for me. I found some online Orthodox apologists like Jay Dyer, and I love debate. I love philosophy and theology and debate, and I got really into that and reading church history and came to the conclusion that I felt the original Orthodox form of Christianity was the most cohesive, most coherent form of Christianity. And
the only thing I don't like about it, they're not in. I like, if I were to go to church, which is very rare, then I quite like singing hymns in English.
Yeah.
And I was at this trad Catholic wedding when I was in England last week before, and there was almost all the singing was from the A in Latin, and B from the choir. And the guy whose wedding it was said to me, I was one of his groomsmen, "Okay, Ed, you can select the one hymn we're going to sing." And then he was going to get rid of that even. And I said, "God, you got to have a hymn. I mean, come on, communitas and all that, bonding, singing together."
Yeah.
But when I've been to the Orthodox Church here in Finland, there's no singing apart from the choir.
Well, in the church that I go to, I've been to several because I do travel a bit. So I've been able to visit lots of different types of Orthodox churches in different jurisdictions. The one that I go to is mostly converts. So we do have a choir that chants, but they do almost all of it in English. And we have like the traditional where it's like the congregation answers. So the choir will chant and then the congregation chants back type of a thing. So there is some reciprocation. And I love the Byzantine chant style. I think it's very beautiful, but I will agree. I go to the Romanian monastery here sometimes, and I don't have any idea what I kind of can catch parts of it, but I don't know the singing myself. But yeah, I can understand. I think for a lot of people, Orthodoxy is very foreign. It feels so foreign because it's more Eastern. So I think that can be a little tough. But if you find an OCA,
I guess that's why that's interesting, though, because I guess that when I've been to Greece or whatever on holiday, it's still precisely because it's foreign, it hasn't been completely subverted and mangled and paused and mocked and ripped apart, right. and so there's still a kind of a mystery to it, a magic to it, which a mysterium tremendum et fascinans inducing something to it, which is not the case with the Catholic Church, which is not the case with the Church of England. I mean, that's what René Guénon argued with regard to Islam. He said that once what Christianity has been utterly mocked, utterly ripped to bits, and so therefore we have to have people who are perennialists, people who are traditionalists, have to have some sort of religious tradition that hasn't been interfered with in this way. Yes. And he argued, I'm not saying he's right, but he argued that is Islam. Other people have argued that it's traditional Catholicism. Other people have argued that it's Orthodoxy. But in each case, it's this idea that there's been this continuous transference of law and of culture and whatever that hasn't been mocked to hell and destroyed. Or even, I mean, Savitri Devi, of course, argued it was Hinduism. That's but what's interesting about those things is that from the perspective of those that are advocating it, it's never or almost never the religion of their own culture. That's been destroyed. That's been ripped apart. That's been mocked. That's no good. Church of England gone, dead. But that they can conceive of, and it's I met a lot of them when I was in the UK. This idea of traditional Catholicism, i.e., Catholicism, but you do it all in Latin, which can come across almost as LARPing in that it kind of died out and they're kind of bringing it back. But I mean, I guess it didn't completely die out. There were some areas that sustained it, or Hinduism or whatever. But then some of them are just so foreign. But when I was in India and they were making their way, there was this sort of bell ringing, and they're making their way to this Hindu temple at sunset. It's a place called Jaipur. And I just said nothing. I just felt almost a sense of just something dark, that it was just so foreign to me. And nothing. Whereas I guess at least with Islam or Orthodox Christianity, at least there's certain things in common, one God or whatever. But yeah, that's interesting that it helped you through it. These problems with feminism and certain leftist ideas. I assume your mother would say she was a feminist. Would she have said that?
Oh yes, she gladly proclaims that she's a radical Marxist feminist. She volunteered for Planned Parenthood. She thinks the fact that I have 5 children is utterly reprehensible. We don't talk anymore. We haven't talked for a long time. And she's, substance abuse, she's had just really a sad life. And I didn't want that for myself. And I certainly don't want that for my children. So, and this is what I've seen in every woman I know who has this, even some of the ones who think they're not feminists, but they have the attitude, they have the mindset, and they have this rebellious streak where they're not going to submit to a man, and they'll do things like refuse to bring their husband his dinner plate because he has 2 legs and he can get it himself, or like smaller things like that where they think they're not feminists. But to my mind, I'm saying, well, you're clearly working out of this feminist mindset and this feminist framework of not wanting to submit or cooperate. And they hear the word submission, first of all, and they get a knee-jerk reaction to the word submission. But they're perfectly happy to submit to their boss at work. They're perfectly happy to submit to a policeman who pulls them over. But their own husband has to be the person that they almost go out of their way to refuse to submit to. And we've caused problems in our family just by showing up to like a picnic or a celebration, and I bring my husband his plate and his beer, and he says thank you and gives me a kiss or something, and all the women will say, don't get any ideas, I'm not going to get up and get you your plate, you can get it yourself. And it causes like this problem where if I behave this way, many of the women around me instantly don't want to be around.
But yet those same women, it's been demonstrated in empirical studies, they like benevolent sexists. So they'll say that I'm a strong woman. I'm going to keep my surname. I'm going to do this, that, and the other. But what they actually like is benevolent sexists. They like it because that's what they're evolved to like. I mean, in this country in Finland, it's very, very gender equal. Scandinavia is highly gender equal, which of course means that there are relatively few women involved in science, because women don't want to be involved in science and engineering and whatever. Even relative to countries like Eastern Europe, there's far fewer as a percentage, and they all want to be involved in cuddly work, teaching and whatever. And if they are doctors, then of course it's things like psychiatry and other wishy-washy subjects rather than surgery, and that's what they've been allowed to do. So this place is actually in a bizarre way less gender equal in that sense, because women can do whatever they like. But if you hold a door open to a random woman in this country, which I make a point of doing just to spread positive social epistasis here, they find it amazing. They'll thank you and look at you like you're a god. They find it the idea that a man would hold a door open to them. I like it. I like going around this country and engaging in just random acts of courtesy. Because the Finns are so discourteous, like, for example, doffing my hat for a woman like that. And they're so unused to it. A Finnish man would never do things like this. It just wouldn't occur to him, because they've been partly because they've been so inculcated with these kinds of extraordinary ideas about equality, which are manifestly not true. Because then, on the other hand, they'll talk here about how chopping the wood for the sauna, that's for a man to do. Driving a car, that's for a man to do. Putting the rubbish out, that's for a man to do. But at the same time, we're all equal. Men and women are equal. Oh yeah, we're equal. Tasa-arvo, as they call it, tasa-arvo. It's absolute nonsense.
Yeah, we have a little joke, my husband and I, because I've called him a skank magnet in the past, because women will hate him because he will just straight up tell them things. He'll just tell them no, he'll tell them you're wrong, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about, or he'll just ignore them, which is the one that really gets them. And they become obsessed. It's like they want to, what's a YouTube friendly way to say this? They want to hate procreate with him, if you know what I mean. It's like they'll just become enraged, like they want to rip his head off, and then it turns into some kind of obsessive lust, and they're always, especially when he was younger, it was like they were always after him for that reason. And people would say, well, what's your secret? How do you get so many girls to like you? And he'd say, I just simply dismiss them and tell them they're stupid, or ignore them, and then they just become obsessed with me and can't get enough of me. So but he's a wonderful dad and a wonderful husband. And so I guess I would probably, I definitely fall into the category of women who prefer more masculine, assertive types of men, intelligent men. I think all of that is attractive in men.
Well, you give me the impression that you're one of these minority of women that basically has the mind of a man. I don't mean that I mean that you think like you're more sort of thinking like a man, aren't you? The fact that you had lots of male friends when you were younger is consistent with this, and the fact that you found it difficult to deal with these various catty females is consistent with this, and so therefore it makes a great deal of sense. That would be the kind of person to whom you would find yourself attracted. And the irony is that there probably is, with returning to the original subject of our discussion, the irony is that a lot of these witches probably would have been masculinized females, and so there probably is a degree to which those females, except they wouldn't have been submissive to the patriarchy, which is interesting because in the normal context, right? What do women do? They tend to very, very strongly socially conform. That means, in that context, being submissive to the patriarchy. So it follows in an anti-patriarchal context, if you are a non-conformer, which if you're high in autistic traits or whatever, then you might be, then you will want to conform to patriarchy just to be different from the herd. So some of this stuff becomes sort of sociological. When people think to themselves, the basic idea that if you are a social conformist now, you're super woke. You avidly conform to the current thing. And I'm afraid, therefore, it follows that you would be the very person in Germany that would be turning your face away from the plumes of human smoke and trying to ignore it. That's exactly what you'd be doing, because you're avidly socially conformist, and that creates a kind of cognitive dissonance in a lot of these I love science type people that are all terribly woke. But that's exactly what they'd be, because they're high in social anxiety, and they're high in Machiavellianism, and they're narcissistic, and they want to fit in. But there must be a sociological dimension to that difference. I'm sure these witches were non-conformists. That's at least true. They were not conforming to the system, and they were persecuted for that because under harsh selection pressures, if you don't conform to the system, you're a danger. And of course, the genius, that's the other thing. The genius doesn't conform to the system, and that with his innovative, original ideas that rock the boat and shake things up. And so therefore he's a danger, and we get more intolerant of those as we move towards the 16th century. You're burning heretics and whatever, burning people that are dissenting from the accepted dogmas. We weren't doing that in the 1300s, but we're doing it by the mid 1400s, and certainly avidly in the 16th century.
Well, I don't know how to think about myself. I mean, I remember a time where my husband said something to me once, and I started to cry. And he was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot that you're a woman." Sometimes I forget, because he'll say that I do think like a man. But on the other hand, I love being a mom. I'm the kind of person that if you come to my house, I just want to bake you cookies and tuck you into bed. And I'm very, very nurturing. So in that way, I think I'm very, very feminine. But then it's like I have two weird opposite parts of my brain. I don't know what to make of it. Maybe you can make something.
I don't know, but we could talk about it more another time. Perhaps if you were to come down my pub.
Yeah.
Let's do that. All right, let's do that.
Yeah. Well, I've kept you for a little over an hour now, so I don't want to keep you too long.
I'm so sorry that you had to sit here for 2 hours or however long it was you sat here waiting for me. I really, really am. I really genuinely believe, for some insane reason, that it was 7 p.m. UK time, i.e. 9 p.m. finish time, and I was wasting time. I was sitting here twiddling my thumbs, waiting to come on a stream, and then I checked Twitter, and you were kind of saying, I don't mean to be moan, but where the bloody hell are you? I apologize. I sent a dono question for him. It says Mela Forte. You should probably check if he was sending questions.
Yeah, let me check and see if anybody sent any
Mud
questions.
sent in a question, and AJ has sent in a question, although that's not relevant to me. And no, I can't see any questions. Anyway, you have to have a look.
Okay. Yeah, I've got one here from Melaforta, and they are asking, what does Ed Dutton think of the prospect of forming stable families in our time with the dating world the way it is, i.e. the 304s, the simpery, the betas, MGTOW, the Andrew Tate mindset, etc.
The 304s, what's the 304s? What does that mean?
It's if you put 304 into a calculator and then you turn the calculator upside down, it says HOE. So it's a sneaky way of calling women promiscuous.
Oh, I see. The dating scene, I don't know if I'm out of touch with this by virtue of age. I don't know, but my experience of going down the pub in Finland is that women are generally quite interested in talking to you. I don't want to give trite advice to young people, but so I've really no advice in that sense to give. I mean, it's certainly a situation. I'm more interested in what is happening according to the data that we analysed, me and my colleague, in our book, The Past is a Future Country, The Coming Conservative Demographic Revolution, is that among the more intelligent, the big sterilizer is liberalism and atheism. And the big fertile, and the heritability of these traits is quite high. It's up to sort of 0.7. And the big fertilizer is conservatism and traditional religiosity. I'm talking specifically among people of European descent. And based on that, I suspect that over the coming decades, certainly by the time I'm an old man, well, maybe I'm an old man, but an older man, we will flip back towards conservatism. It's essentially inevitable because of the breeding patterns that are going on and the heritability of the traits involved. Now, in the IQ is going down, and in that societies are balkanizing due to immigration and just due to the internet causing balkanization and whatever, I suspect it will happen in a context of decline. I suspect you're going to have the breakup. It always happens in the winter of civilization. The breakup of large polities into smaller polities, the shrinking of the area where civilization is preserved, a neo-Byzantium, if you like. But I suspect that those places will be highly religiously conservative, and therefore the dating market for men will not be as much of a problem in those kinds of places. And I think this is already happening. I think it's the only way one can make sense of the data on how left-wing Generation Z is. People that are 20 should be predictably more left-wing than people that are 40, but they're not. They're not as left-wing in relation to people who are 40 as they should be. And what makes sense of that is polarization among those people. And the polarization would be predicted by the breeding processes that I just mentioned, whereby the conservatives the liberals are residing from the gene pool. The future belongs to those who turn up. And the conservatives and the religious conservatives particularly are growing as a percentage, and that would be what would make sense of it. So you're getting this polarization among that generation in which they are creating, and the internet and whatever is so helpful in the creation of this, their own essentially sub-communities based around traditional rules of engagement in terms of sex and in terms of whatever. And so I would think the thing to do if you're a young based chap looking for a bird is to get involved. I don't mean to patronize you. Is to get involved in sub communities of like-minded people of that kind. And I suspect that eventually they will start to become physical communities of some kind as well.
I would agree. That's usually my advice, although I don't have like a cure-all piece of advice for people who ask me this question either, because the dating pool is what it is at the moment. But there are, like, in my chat and in my community, I have lots of young ladies. I get maybe a white pill for everyone is that I get messages daily from women who read my book or see my debates or something like that. And they say to me, oh, I really want a family and I want to be a wife. I don't want to be a careerist feminist. And the things that you say give me some courage and some encouragement that I'm not the crazy one and that this is an acceptable life choice. Like, thank you for that, because my parents don't support it and people around me don't support it. But, you know, you give me some encouragement. So there's women out there who do want that. They are tougher to find at the moment, but I think there's a lot of truth in what Mr. Dutton just said too. My daughters who are 20 and 22 are definitely not career minded or feminist or anything like that. They tend to be much more homemaker types, and they're actually having trouble finding young men who aren't expecting, you know, sex on the first date and things like that. So I know it's rough out there, but
No, so we're exactly the same age then. We're exactly the same age. If your daughter,
20 and 22.
If your daughter is 22 and you were 20 when you had her, that would make us exactly the same age.
Probably. I'm 42.
Yes, I'm 42. I didn't know that. I thought you were younger. But okay. Yes, fair enough. I see. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. That's a fair point. Yes. And I also say I get a lot of men writing to me about this kind of thing. Look, 18 or whatever, I've never had a girlfriend. No, you haven't. If you've had a girlfriend and you're 18, then what you're probably some sort of R strategist that lives on a council estate and whatever. No, you shouldn't be. You concentrate on your education. You'll find a bird at university. That's how it works.
Yeah.
You know, that's just the system. It's only people that are sort of are strategic members of the new underclass that start having sex when they're 16, 17, for God's sake.
So, yeah, stacking up a high body count by the time they're 20.
Yeah, exactly. So no, that's not how it works. You should feel that. But the problem is that when I was their age, there was no internet. You couldn't find out about these things. You couldn't discover the data on this. And so you just, whereas now you can. So there's no need to be concerned about. No one goes to university anymore. Dutton, says Rigovich. I think you find they do. I think you find that 50% of the English sixth formers go to university. Okay, the universities are increasingly meaningless and worthless, but they're definitely going to them. That's certainly the case.
Well, this has been a wonderful chat. I would love to talk to you again anytime that you would like to. I really enjoy your work. When your book comes, I will go over it with a fine-tooth comb and take all the notes, because I really like your approach to this topic. And thank you so much for coming. Even though we got our times mixed up, that was probably just as much my fault. And I'm just very thankful that you popped in.
It was definitely clearly, as I read the messages back earlier, it really was my fault. So I'm most violently sorry. But anyway, thank you for having me on. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for being here. And we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.